But Ray Cole stood with us. All of us. In Baltimore. Working. Sharing a dark corner of the American experiment. He was called. He served. He is counted. Old King Cole. Old King Cole.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Hello, welcome back for more Caught on the Wire. It's a beautiful sunny day where I am here in Liverpool. I hope it's the same for you there, Toby, in London.
It's been absolutely splendid today. Not a cloud in the
What a
sky.
beautiful day.
Yeah. And we say this as, British people, and we don't see it often, so...
It's very rare that you can go outside and not worry about needing a jacket.
It means a lot. It really does to us. So...
The whole mood of the country lifts when the... when the weather's nice. Everyone's so used to it being very average.
Yeah, everyone just jumps out of their house and runs down to the park and really soaks it up.
But let's not try too hard to propagate the stereotype that British people only know how to talk about the weather, and sort of make our way towards something a little bit more podcast orientated. Unless this is going to be some kind of weather forecast opening that we're going to have.
Wire and weather.
Yeah, and it's always. There's a nice range of weather in the Wire.
Yeah, the seasons change, nice and subtly.
Yeah, it's nice that they're included. What have you been watching this week? Did you see the new Game of Thrones?
Oh, I wondered if you asked me that. Of course, it was a real good episode as well. I understand that us talking about these kind of not one-off Game of Thrones episodes, but very mid-season episodes of Game of Thrones won't mean much, I guess, a few years down the line. If you are listening that long time down the line, but it was a really good episode. It was season 5, right? Episode 5, so we're halfway through the season. Very focused episode, only a few little locations. I probably don't think we should spoil much, as this isn't really a Game of Thrones spoiler podcast, but I was very impressed.
Yeah, I think the way that they're choosing to arc some of the characters in this season is nice. I like a lot of the new locations. I think they're really nicely done. The attention to detail in the show just seems to be getting better in terms of providing that almost immersive element. So, yeah, can't really say much more without spoiling it, really.
Definitely. I don't really feel like I know what the big destination for this season is.
I do feel like not a whole lot happened in that episode. It was a lot of... In Game of Thrones, I feel like sometimes you can notice the formula where characters will just state their intentions or their character style or their beliefs or their ideologies to some other character, and it'll be a scene where they make some grand speech to someone. There's a lot of scenes like that in Game of Thrones throughout the whole breadth of the seasons. There's kind of a lot of scenes like that, and not a lot happens as a result. What you learn is characters' intentions and the fact that they're going to do something big, and you don't get to find out what it is until later on, but we're going to see them progressing towards that. And it's a lot of characters doing that, basically. There's
kind of two types of episode, isn't there? There's the big setup episodes where everyone, as you say, is milling around and explaining the plot to each other almost. And then you get the ones that everyone waits for, the real event episodes that are punctuated by those little ones. We haven't had many of them at all this season. I feel like seasons 3 and 4 we were a bit more spoilt with big developments, but I like where it's going. Everything's been interesting so far. It's definitely not been boring, but it's definitely been slower. And hopefully that'll be to its benefit as the season finishes.
Yeah. Anything else of note this week?
No.
Anything you've been watching? Anything in the news?
No.
Anything Wire related?
I think that's a pretty good discussion of Game of Thrones without spoilers. That's about as far as we could have gone, right?
Yeah. I had to bleep a couple of... Was it the first episode we did?
Yeah. I won't mention it again. Almost did. But yeah, no. What have I been watching this week? Not a lot, really. I'm just staying loyal to the shows that I enjoy, really. So Mad Men and Game of Thrones at the moment. It was, of course, Better Call Saul back then. So yeah, and of course a lot of The Wire. When you're podcasting, you can't help but just watch reams and reams of The Wire each week, which is great. So
I also saw, this is more between you and me, really, because also we had Tom on the show. And those of you that have heard the finale for season 1, I dare say you have, if you're at this point. We had our friend Tom Quee, who is a sort of spoken word poet. He joined us for the finale. I saw a video that he posted because he's working on a little short sort of mini-series at the moment. And it's like a spoken word drama called What They Said, and he posted it. I don't know if you saw that.
I did, actually, yeah. I was... my critique was requested yesterday, so... yeah, I'm very excited for it, actually. I'm fondly looking forward to it. It's coming out sometime in July. It hasn't got an actual release date yet, but I believe it's going to be a 2-episode show. Is that right? There might be some more coming. I mean, it's basically about a bar in Birmingham that holds open mic nights for spoken word artists, I guess. And it looks like the show's going to be kind of mainly poets performing spoken word pieces mixed with a little bit of kind of round the stage drama between the performers. So it's quite a nice idea for a show. Should be a bit different.
And I think Tom is writing all the poems.
Yeah.
So it's quite a little project. So it's just something a friend of ours is working on. I thought was pretty cool. I mean, if you want to check it out, then the best port of call would be a plug for Tom's Twitter account, which he's very active on. So it's Tom Quee Poet, at Tom Quee Poet, Quee being Kwei. So yeah, check it out.
Yeah, definitely.
Little plug.
I'm sure we'll appreciate it.
Should we skitter over to Listener's Corner?
Yes.
I see that the postman has been.
I had a little look
got
today.
a few more
It's
emails this week.
Really expanding, isn't it, our postbox?
Yes, it's great to kind of be getting sort of looking up at the email and seeing a few people dropping by to send messages. And we've had a couple of people giving really in-depth looks at some of what we've been talking about in previous episodes. Dan, who we spoke to last week, the guy who also is doing a similar thing to myself, making music for media and the like, but obviously a big fan of The Wire, and he was talking a lot about some of the points we raised. So I'll just go through a couple of them here. It's a big email, so I won't do the whole thing, but he made a good point about Cutty. I thought this was great. When we were talking about the title, Time After Time, this was for the first episode. We were talking about the way that could be interpreted. He said, another small take I had on the title was in relation to Cutty. It's now his time back on the street after doing the time in prison. Time after, quote, time, his sentence. I like to think this kind of works in a way. I thought that was a really good observation.
Yeah, that is really nice. And it
Very good.
Makes a lot of sense. Adds a whole new dimension to that title. I feel really annoyed that I didn't get it myself. But yeah.
Yeah, it was
Props.
Nice. There's a couple of others. He talks about a little bit more about Cutty and brings up kind of Cutty's arc in the sense that we don't see what put him in prison. Well, obviously, we hear that he's this big soldier and he clearly took one for the Barksdales. But after 14 years is a long time, so presumably he's changed quite a lot. We see a little bit more in this episode where he's trying to get himself correct, as they say, and smarten up a bit and try to get himself towards the more desirable lifestyle. He wants to get off the street. And I think, I've forgotten her name now, but the sister of... Grace, yeah, that's right. I don't remember the sister's name. It's played by the same lady.
That's right, yeah.
So they're meant to be twin sisters, but it's actually played by the same actress.
She's playing two extreme ends of the spectrum there, yeah.
She does a damn good job of presenting two very different characters.
Yeah. And they're totally kind of viable as kind of identical twins that just went in two different directions. It works well. Yeah, it's good to see that Cutty not only has a criminal skeleton in his closet, but also kind of this love life that's resurfacing. And yeah, as we're discussing, there's not a lot to let us know how that went on in the 80s, back when it probably was, but it's nice that we can kind of fill in the gaps ourselves, I guess.
Yeah. He also talks a little bit more about Stringer and Royce, and I think we made a comparison in that first episode about the two of them wanting to create some kind of reform. And Stringer was trying to create genuinely positive reform in a business sense in the drug war, whilst Royce was trying to create reform for his political means, but doesn't have as good intentions. It's more like self-serving. Whereas Stringer kind of wants to have a whole operation working towards something a little bit more, positive, I suppose, something that doesn't require so many murders, for example. But Dan was saying that ultimately, Stringer's gain is still self-serving. I'll just quote him a little bit here. I've never really seen Stringer in a positive light, though. I know he's looking for a non-violent, non-gangster bullshit method of conducting business, but it's, in my opinion, entirely based around selfishness and personal gain. Yes, he wants far fewer bodies, but that's purely because he doesn't want to get caught. He doesn't care if people actually die, and he's been quick to order the hits of numerous people. It's the police attention that he cares about, understandably, of course. I've just never had any sympathy for him, and both his and Royce's views on reform are for personal gain. One character benefits from not keeping the promises of reform, and the other loses everything if there is anything but reform. Two sides of the same coin in my eyes.
Very, very articulate analysis there, definitely. Yeah, that's very true of Stringer. What we like to think of him as a bit of a arbiter of the street and just changing things for the better, but I guess it's just a byproduct of his selfishness, isn't it, really? It's not anything that he wanted to put in place. So, yeah, a very good observation.
Yeah, he's certainly quick to temper in quite a few cases as he gains a little bit more control over the Barksdale's day-to-day running. And as that grows, he becomes a lot more vulnerable in terms of his identity, and he kind of gets a little bit of the rep for himself. Like later on, for example, where he's talking about wanting Clay Davis assassinated, and what a move of complete arrogance. Yeah. It's purely there as a reputation. How dare he slight me? This is what will be done to him. Whereas supposedly he's supposed to be against that. So I think it's a good point that Dan raises, that ultimately Stringer is still being selfish, but it has a slightly more genuine impact when it's trying to create fewer bodies.
It has positive side
I guess
effects,
although both of them are self-interested, one could argue that there's, it's difficult to make it quantitative in terms of ethics, but there is a positive impact, a positive byproduct of what Stringer is doing, whereas Royce's moves are very empty and they come across as shallow.
Yeah, very good. I think it's good to compare those to the other reformers as well. We have Carcetti, whose intentions appear to be very self-serving as well. And then eventually kind of has a bit of an epiphany and genuinely wants to help the city out, as we see throughout Season 4. And then again gradually becomes corrupted, so it's a bit of a seesaw for Carcetti with regard to his intentions about bringing the reform. I guess the only one who's kind of free of guilt or has a empty conscience is Cutty. Sorry, not Cutty, Colvin, whose intentions are very plain from the start, that he's a good guy and he's there for the people, and he's just very frustrated with the way the system has been corrupted over the years.
Yeah, just having a look through because we got a couple of emails from Dan, so I just want to give him a fair shake because we're talking about all due respect as well. So I'm just having a look here. Sure. Talks a little bit about Randall Frazier. He says, quote, "I think this is the last time we see Dr. Frazier." He's talking about In All Due Respect. Something about him always stood out to me, and for some reason I wish we could have seen more of his character. He had a certain gravitas that I couldn't put my finger on. Maybe it's just his height. But I always really enjoyed his interactions with McNulty. The actor, Eric Todd Dellums, just played him with a certain charismatic effortlessness. Can't explain this one. I must be mad. He only appears in 5 episodes. So Dan's take on Dr. Randall Frazier there, who is a pretty rare character for the show. Does he stand out much for you, Toby?
Yeah. I mean, as Dan said, he is very memorable despite only appearing 5 times. And that speaks volumes for his character, really. He's played very well and he does make his mark. He's very cocksure, confident coroner. And he bounces really well off McNulty. I think they share most of Frazier's scenes together, actually. And they're clearly 2 people on the same side of the tracks, really. They're kind of out there for the work. They're very, very work-motivated people. So it's I think, you're right. It must be the last time we see him, which is a shame. But, he's a very memorable character, despite his few appearances.
Yeah, Frazier is quite easy to relate to in that underdog sense, in that he he's not really as bothered by all of the pomp and circumstance and authority of it all. He's very work focused, like you say, and he has a certain McNulty-esque disregard for the brass.
Yeah.
It seems
he's lucky that his line of work allows him to stay away from the politics, unlike McNulty's, where it's constantly interfering with what he does.
But it's also to the disadvantage of the police work, because often he's on more than pretty much every time we see him. In fact, Fraser provides some kind of really critical analysis or sort of knowledge in his area towards cause of death, or all that kind of in his area, and he's able to turn a case around on that information sometimes.
Yeah.
So, he's hidden away from all of the politics of the police, so a lot of his information doesn't seem to get out there because he's not necessarily involved with the type of people that would be able to make use of that information. He seems a bit tucked away and forgotten about, doing something somewhat procedural, just dealing with the bodies. But he also has an investigative side to him, which is possibly not harnessed in that position.
Although
he almost seems like he might be a good detective as well.
Definitely. I'm reminded of the time in Season 2 where he did make somewhat of a political move, where he reclassified deaths as murders based on one of McNulty's kind of theories about stomping on the air pipe. And it was within his power to make that autopsy or that prognosis, and he did so, I guess, which was perhaps quite a bold move considering the bosses above wanting all those murders to go away. So,
well, that's kind of where we're endeared to his rebellious streak.
Yeah.
But you don't feel like he's doing it just to piss them off. He's doing it because
that's what the work
in
is.
his professional opinion, that sounds plausible.
Yeah.
So it feels genuine.
Definitely.
So yeah, that was some of the stuff that we had from Dan. I would love to kind of discuss all of it really, but unfortunately we don't have that much time. But some really great stuff there, some really good talking points. Keep them coming in.
Yeah.
We also heard from Matt, who we've heard a couple of times before. Matt, I think we mentioned before, was doing some DIY. He had some home decorating that he was doing and was listening to the podcast whilst he was doing that.
We got an update on the state of the project.
Oh, I think he said that he's finished. So
right.
I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I'm glad to hear that it's finished. Clearly gone well. Hope the podcast's expedited the painting and sanding and whatever it is that you were doing. But just having a look through here. He did send me a video. I don't know if you've seen this, about the Wire RPG.
Yes, that's right. I think I have
seen that, yeah. It's like a sort of turned into this sort of Final Fantasy-esque game, and it's pretty good. The only trouble is, although it is very good, and it's really nice to see the attention to detail and the way that it's presented, the jokes are a bit like on the nose. Like if you've seen The Wire, it's a kind of, there's not a lot of subtlety to the humour in the way that it presents. It's a
whirlwind tour of all the major kind of one-liners, isn't it? Really, yeah.
Yeah. It's strange. It's almost like it's presenting the stuff as though it's an introduction to The Wire, when in fact only someone who's actually seen The Wire could really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. It's a
but it's a good video.
It's a very anti-season 2 video as well. I think it's is it comic humour, something humour that made it.
College humour.
College humour. Clearly didn't enjoy season 2. I think the season 2 segment of the game is just nothing happens in this season, skip to next one sort of thing. So there's at least some sort of Wire joke going on there.
Yeah.
Also worth linking I think one of my favourite kind of incidental Wire videos is the Broadway stage show. That's definitely worth posting, I think, if we haven't already, to the
Wire the musical.
Yeah, it's really, really good. It picks a few more of the subtle moments in the show, like it has like a burner character, just someone dressed up as a burner, one of their mobile phones, and just just
Michael K. Williams is in it, isn't he?
Yeah, and Sonia Son as well, and Andre Royo, Bubbles turns up as well. So they managed to hire a fair chunk of the cast, and yeah, it's very well done. Oh, and of course Larry as well. D'Angelo makes an appearance.
All right.
So some of the key scenes have been musicalized. It's definitely worth watching.
Matt was also letting us know that he'd posted links to the podcast on a couple of forums that he frequents, which we definitely appreciate, seeing as we've not really posted the podcast anyway, really. So if listeners have anyone else that you think might like it, then share it with them, because we've kind of shared it with our mates, but we haven't really gone much beyond that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely appreciated. Thank you. He said he put it one on the TV section of Piston Heads, and the other is a watch forum called TZ UK that has a general discussion sub-forum.
Sweet.
Both have previously had lively wire threads. So,
All right, that's great, yeah.
so yeah, maybe we'll get to it. If you've found the show from that way, then welcome. welcome from Piston Heads and TZ UK. Not websites I'm familiar with, but always welcoming new Wire fans, that's for sure.
Yeah, even if they are 23 episodes in. Hey.
And another repeat message or repeat emailer, I suppose, from Damon, who says a little bit about Cutty looking at the package in his basement. So a bit more Cutty here. He says, I think he's just pondering whether or not he wanted to go back into the game. I think he knew maybe all the gel caps he was looking at could put him right back in jail, and he wasn't quite sure he wanted to go that route again. Just my 2 cents. So that was that slightly ambiguous scene with Cutty where he's just kind of on his bed and he's just kind of eyeing up the gel caps, and he seems a bit overwhelmed by how many there are.
Lingering scene, yeah. I think on the podcast we perhaps neglected to realise that he was having a bit of a morality crisis. I just remember the first time I watched it, I assumed he was a real Barksdale soldier through and through and wouldn't be considering that. He'd be more considering how the game had changed, perhaps. But yeah, it makes sense that, was he in prison for 20 years or so? Something similar to that. Like, that's seriously got to change you and make you rethink the way the whole world works, really. So that's probably a much more feasible explanation.
Yeah, I mean, they do stamp down sort of Cutty's reluctance quite early on. I mean, pretty much straight away. So, yeah, I know what you mean though. It's because something about the performances, again, it has an ambiguity to it, which is really a testament to the work of Chad C. Coleman.
That's it. Yeah,
is that his name?
That's right.
It's just a testament to his performance because, like you say, on those earlier viewings, it's easier to just accept it as, oh, he's a soldier and now he's going through it and we're seeing him go through these motions. But it's pretty clear if you kind of take a harder look, have a bit of a rewatch. He seems very reluctant straight from the get-go, and his involvement is almost like dipping his toe in, seeing if that's what he wants to go for, seeing how much it's changed. But he doesn't have to go very far to find out that it's not in him anymore. Yeah,
of course, there is that famous scene where he officially announces that he's out. The game ain't in me no more, as you mentioned. But I guess, as you say, when you look back at these early episodes, he's been out from the very start. It's just, I guess it's just weighing up options for a little bit and decides that that's definitely not the best option. And I'm going to stay out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that's a resignation in the drug game.
Yeah.
That's how you resign.
And he's the only one who's been able to resign as well, without death coming to him.
Yeah, Avon seems still very respectful of him despite it, so. But that's for a later episode. Damon also, because he lives in Baltimore County, he was just saying a little bit more about the riots recently. He says, living in Baltimore, things have been quite uneasy with the riots that happened recently. It's made everyone even more divisive. I find myself, even in the county, looking over my shoulder just a little more. Things seem to have calmed down of late since the officers have been indicted. So things may be calming down a bit over there. Like I said, I've not kept up with it too much myself, but the sort of, suppose, sort of surface level journalism I did see on it was looked like it pretty serious. I'm glad to hear people are.
Yeah, it's been
people are safe.
Been going for a while now, hasn't it? I don't know how many weeks ago it started, but it must have been, a good 3 or 4 weeks now. So I'm glad that things are, from what it sounds like, calming down.
But will anything actually change?
Yeah.
And if the wire is to be believed, then no.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, even if you look at the historical context, there's been plenty of people protesting about the way that police officers have been treating members of the black community in all sorts of cities across the US, and doesn't seem to be showing any signs of going down anytime soon.
Nope.
It's something like a huge percentage of sort of people within a certain age bracket in prison. It's like a significant percentage of them are black.
Yeah.
And it's it's sort of something about it doesn't seem to add up, does it? Like,
Yeah.
But like, why is it such a massive proportion? It seemed just a little bit of discrimination going on there. It's not exactly subtle. So I think people are going to figure that out.
Yeah.
So hopefully that they'll get the message eventually. You can hardly, no, rioting is never a good thing in that sense, but sometimes, what was it? I might have said this before actually, but I think it was Martin Luther King that said the riot is the last action of the unheard, or something like that. It's the voice of the unheard.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing there. I think I mentioned it in an earlier episode, but it just makes me think of that. Like, the reason why they're writing is because they don't seem to have any other means of communicating their frustration.
Yeah, just kind of excluded from society, really, isn't it? And yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's kind of the last, most physical form of protest, really, to go out and show people that you are there and that you do matter. And
the downside is that it's it gives a certain carte blanche to some people to go out and just behave like gangsters, like they've always wanted to. They can be masked by the crowd.
Yeah.
There's so much going on that they know it can't be contained, so it's an excuse for people who just a bit thuggish and have a sort of overwhelming desire for material wealth in order to show off to others, to go around kicking in shops and stealing TVs and new trainers and stuff like that, and claiming that it's totally worth it.
We saw an awful lot of that in 2011 over here in London.
Oh yeah, the London riots. I mean, there was so much of that, and it's just embarrassing. Like,
yeah,
I got myself some new trainers. Yeah,
they were really showing off to the news presenters as well, like just showing off all their loot that they've managed to grab from these sort of defenseless shops that they broke into.
But again, you have to consider, I guess, the impact of media on this. How much of a percentage of the people are really doing that? I mean, it's easy to stick a camera at something bad happening and go, look, it's happening, and then create this overwhelming sense that by it being there, it is now somehow everywhere, and it's insidious. It's getting into our society. So how much of a percentage of the people who attended those riots actually went around kicking in people's doors and stealing TVs is not a statistic that I've seen.
No. Very true.
I guess you can't make everyone perfect, can you? For whatever reason, that's the way they've grown up and that's what they value. So
yeah, it's just two worlds. Yeah, definitely.
Heaven and here, you could say.
Whoa, bringing it right back to the wire.
So thanks. I think I'll bring Listener's Corner to a close there. Thanks for your emails, guys. Really appreciated. Some great stuff there. Really good talking points.
Keep them coming.
Keep them coming, yeah. Ditto. Aren't we supposed to do jinx or something there if we say something at the same time?
Jinx?
Oh, now I can't... I'm speaking, so I'm kind of ruined the rule already, but technically I now can't speak for the rest of the podcast, so you're on your own, Toby.
Yeah, well, thankfully it is my week to do the recap, so you can, if you want to, live out your sentence for a few minutes while I read out the first of these lengthy chapters.
And I will be tapping my responses on my microphone with my pen in Morse code.
That'll make a very intriguing listen for some of the more... That works. If I could understand Morse code, I'd be, really feeling it right now. But with regard to speaking, and that's my role right now, I'm going to kick off with a recap, if you don't have any objections to that. And we have a fair few sections this week. We've got politics, we've got Barksdale and Omar, we've got homicide, we've got the major case unit, we've got Detective Cole's wake, we've got the Western District, we've got the Stanfield crew, and we've got Cutty. I mean, the strands just keep on multiplying, and there are a few sections for each one as well. So anyone who enjoys a long podcast, I think they're in for a long ride here. But I've managed to sort of whittle it down into about 18 subsections, which isn't too bad. So I'm going to kick straight off, won't waste any time with our politics section. And we start off with Major Colvin and Lieutenant Mello attending the weekly Comstat meeting. Colvin cannot bring himself to go in. He's not the only one who's nervous. Major Taylor of the Eastern is vomiting in the bathroom. Colvin tries to reassure him, but he remains afraid. In the meeting, Deputy Commissioner Rules continues to disparage Taylor. Acting Commissioner Burrell intercedes to demote Taylor and replaces him with his Deputy Major Creswich. So, there we have our opening scene.
And it starts off with that dreaded walk to Comstat. It's a long, slow...
Yeah.
You know, they're kind of taking their time.
Yeah, they're
padding their way towards,
not in
and
a
the way the
hurry.
camera sort of slowly zooms in on the horror of the sign, Comstat.
I mean, the actual...
So yeah, dreading it, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, the way the camera zooms in on that Comstat, isn't it? It's kind of like pointing at the gateway to hell, almost. And the actual...
Meet your doom.
Pretty much. And the very opening scene of the episode is actually the elevator doors opening as the elevator bell dings. It's kind of like tolling the bells for death. Someone's career is about to go down the pan. So
it's used a lot in The Wire. There's quite a few places, I think, where you have the ding of the elevator, and that's the opening of the scene.
yeah,
Especially in the police building, it's used quite a bit. Or at least it's used as the opening to a shot. It'll be shot, changed immediately. It'll be ding, doors opening, and then it's kind of centered, and it's used quite a few times in The Wire.
Yeah.
Just because I guess it's a nice segue.
yeah, it's a nice way. It opens the scene not just for us but for the character as well. It's like the start of a new scene for them. So yeah, it works well, and it's quite symbolic with the way the bell tolls at the start for this big Comstat meeting that's mattered more than any that have come before it. And they march in double file, as you say, very, very slowly to the door. Comstat is looming. And not even Colvin can bring himself to go in quite yet. He's going to have to go and relieve himself in the sink. So
Yeah, we're presented with the real pressures of a job at that level. Just mentally, you become so kind of terrified about the security of your job and the way you're being judged by your superiors and maintaining all of these stats, and that's a lot for one person to take, irrespective of whether or not they're doing a good job. And that's a matter for hiring and firing and those kind of decisions. But I think the real kind of lashing that Rules gives people puts them under a lot of pressure. And I guess that's his intent, but it's in a way that just makes it harder for people to do their jobs properly because they're constantly afraid. To the point here where Taylor is like being physically sick before he goes in. I mean, that's a really telling level of anxiety.
yeah,
How does anyone be expected to improve their ability to do something when they feel awful about it?
yeah. I guess it goes the other way, doesn't it? You need the appropriate amount of pushing to get someone to be efficient. And this really seems like it's going the wrong way. And we see, I mean, once Rules opens his mouth and explains what he wants from them, we see that it is pretty unreasonable. Command wants them to... He shows them a bunch of pictures of street corners and says, a few nights ago, someone was murdered here, and now it's crawling with residents. They might call them drug dealers, but these people that live here, what can you expect to do? You can't just clear a corner. They're suggesting that they should go and arrest everyone who walks within, vicinity of the street. So Taylor tries to defend his actions and, says that they're always going to sell somewhere. It's whoever we lock up, someone else is going to step into their place, and it really adds credence to Bunny's argument of late, pushing towards this kind of legalization that the show is trying to kind of lay down the argument for in these early episodes. So,
Yeah, I think I thought that there was a nice switch of power, or maybe a facade of power, I don't know, but we have a very sweaty Major Taylor up on the podium, sort of supposedly at the position where one would normally speak or lecture or dictate or have some kind of attention or authority over their audience. And despite all of that and the big presentation behind him, the one with the real power is Rules, like right at the back of the room, kind of pointing up towards the stage. This kind of, Taylor's supposed to have this position of power in the room, and yet he's the one that's getting all the flack. Like, it's kind of nice just to reinforce that weight on his shoulders.
yeah, absolutely true. He can barely get
The Comstat is a real kind of pit, isn't it? Like, in a way, it's kind of like the dogfight with Cheese. They're just being let loose, but one dog gets absolutely destroyed.
Yeah.
Hopefully nobody goes out and shoots Major Taylor in the head after the meeting.
Well, I mean, like the dogfight, it was one-sided. I mean, someone's got the hold of power and rigged the game, and Rules is managing that.
Yeah.
And we see it as he's fired on the spot in the opening scene. Most jobs you'd probably have to go into a nice meeting and work through targets to avoid getting made redundant, but here it's just a straight, you're out, and here comes your deputy. So it really is a cutthroat world over here in Comstat, and another kick. I guess mainly what the scene is saying, that this is a real kick in the gut for Bunny, Another major blow last week, it was the shooting of Dozeman, and they're not giving us any shortages of reasons for setting up Amsterdam. They're really, really fighting the case for it here in the opening episodes. They're giving us plenty of reasons to side with Bunny and his frustration. And we see here he's now beginning to make the motions of setting up this Amsterdam district.
Yeah, really starting to... well, he has that moment in the lift, doesn't he, where he literally just says, well, I thought I might legalise drugs. In a strange sort of way, he almost is testing the audience. He is kind of, dipping his elbow in the bathwater to see if is it too hot to do this now?
Yeah.
But he kind of, it seems totally ridiculous to them, clearly.
It was a very clever way of doing it, because if, you can guarantee that all of them assumed it was a joke, but it's either or, isn't it? If you don't believe it, it's guaranteed to be a joke, because it's too ridiculous otherwise to be believed. So he definitely got away with saying that, off scot-free.
I guess he knows from experience that way of treating people and getting ideas to become commonplace in a police world. So, for example, to some extent, that's how they've ended up with a rule of coercion. Is that over time, as people rise up the ranks, they get more and more pressure put on them, and so they learn from that, so that when they get that to that position, they kind of treat people that way as well. And we talked about Daniel's learning from that style of politics into the police in order to get what he wants.
Yeah.
And Bunny is using that in a very subversive way by sort of joking about things but actually being deadly serious. That seems to be a very common thing. Like in Homicide, Landsman does that all the time. He's always making these incredible jokes about things that are actually very serious, and it's just there to coerce people into doing things. So.
And the system has to be very broken for those things to be said and be taken as jokes. The system really has to have gone far away from what it's meant to be doing, and it really demonstrates how messed up things are.
Yeah, it's a constant reminder of how dysfunctional this institution is.
Absolutely.
And Bunny knows that he has to harness that in a way in order to make any difference, because if you fight too hard, especially when you're a major, he doesn't want to end up like Taylor and just getting fired outright.
Not at all.
I guess he's not as worried about it because of his 30, as he calls it, coming up.
Yeah, I assume that's 30 years on the job, is it?
I guess it must be. I think we had an email from, I can't remember who, I do apologise, but one listener possibly told us about the way that police pensions work, because I think we questioned it in season 1, and it's about how many years you've been on the job, not your age.
Yeah.
So I guess that's part of it. So maybe it's 30 years, I guess.
That's a fairly long time.
Yeah, very long time.
All right. Okay, so should we move on?
Yeah.
So our second political strand is Councilman Carcetti. He's with Tony Gray. He's playing liar's poker in their offices. Carcetti always seems to win. Carcetti has a reporter meet him to discuss the delayed police academy training that he found out about last week. He discusses it off the record. Carcetti tells the reporter that Mayor Clarence Royce is delaying the classes as a money-saving exercise, despite problems in the police department and rising crime rates. Carcetti calls Burrell to give him advance warning of the story so that he can alert the mayor to it before it breaks. Burrell is outraged that Carcetti has gone to the press and believes the mayor will blame him. Burrell meets with Royce and his chief of staff, Coleman Parker. The mayor asks Burrell to take the hit over the story by saying the delay is due to internal problems. Burrell agrees, and the mayor tells him he is grateful for his loyalty. Oh, Burrell, you're being kicked between all the posts, aren't you?
Yeah. You could kind of feel for him here, that Carcetti stitching him up in a way.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a power play on Carcetti's part, isn't it?
Oh, it's a real kind of abuse of the system here, without shame. And we particularly that manipulation of the media with the Baltimore Sun reporter coming in. Really nice that guy is, one of the reporters in the show once season 5 hits as well.
Yeah, he becomes a slightly regular character, and here he is just popping up in season 3. Again, we were talking before about how everything's nice and planned out, like the whole lock that door thing with Stringer. Like, there's a real sense of planning that's gone into it, which is satisfying.
Yeah, it really melds the world together, and the sort of thing that only a rewatch could let you appreciate the greatness of, because there's no way you're remembering this guy once you hit season 5, sort of thing. You have to come back.
Hey, it's that reporter that spoke to Carcetti in one scene for like 10 seconds.
I mean, if you do have a photographic memory, then you might be in luck, but otherwise you're going to have to come back and appreciate it again. So yeah, it's good to see that, and we see that the only way, or the way it's painted here, is the only way to really pursue power in this system is to use very shady manipulation of the media and self-aggrandization through. He was giving the paper the reaction quotes from himself here to kind of put himself forward and paint himself as the reform that's going to fix this broken system. And as reprehensible as this is, using this method to point out the flaws in the current system is the only way to really do it, from what we've seen. And it was kind of very funny, Carcetti phoning Burrell to warn him and try and save his ass. So it's a pretty awful move. I think we got our first shit as well of the season on the phone there.
From Burrell, no less.
Yes, I guess he was in a real sticky situation and just had to let one rip.
A very clever move from Royce as well, to have Burrell sort of take the hit, make the explanation, and then allow Royce to come forward with we've got a plan to reform this. See, we're sticking to our guns. We're responding to troubles. They're going to come in and save the day. It's a very clever little move on his part. And he just, all he has in return for Burrell is, I thank you for your loyalty.
Yeah.
I guess Burrell just has to hope that there's something cushy coming down the line.
There's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, I very much doubt.
Which is hard to believe, seeing there's, there is a certain seed of dislike for Burrell that develops in the mayor's office, not necessarily from the mayor himself, but we've seen already Odell Watkins.
Yeah.
He's kind of planting those seeds, and he talks about that. We'll talk about that later on. I think that's probably the next strand, is it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it was good to see that later on, following all this debacle, Carcetti pretty much explained what happened blow for blow. He predicted it. He said, okay, I was a bit of an arsehole about it, but you got your academy class early, as you wanted, and you probably got some loyalty points with, Royce. Royce is going to hopefully help you out later down the line. So it's clear that Carcetti really understands the system and is playing it in his favour completely. So.
Yeah, he's very opportunistic guy, clearly.
Yeah.
It makes him one of the best characters, but also, again, a very, very conflicted character in terms of how much you're rooting for him.
Yeah.
Because although he's doing a lot of good and he ultimately wants to serve the city and gain that reputation, he's still just going after the power, and he's going to take what opportunity he can.
Definitely.
There are moments where he sticks to his principles, and that in those cases it almost always tends to be to his detriment, especially later on with the governor.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's an interesting start for Carcetti. We kind of see the fact that he's very likable, he's very charismatic, he's very happy-go-lucky, but he's also got, like McNulty, he's a bit of a womanizer. He's not afraid to put other people in the shit in order to make himself of higher standing.
Definitely, yeah. And I feel like the way he's directed in these early episodes really tries to exaggerate his ambition and ego, particularly that phone call with Burrell, the way we're completely underneath him the whole time. And we're just kind of looking up at this figure walking away from City Hall in this suit with his BlackBerry, and he's really very forthright with what he's saying. And all those feet up on the desks, he's really painted as this real, kind of, at the very least, very egomaniacal guy.
Traces of American Psycho, or at least Christian Bale.
Yeah, I'd say if The Wire ended here, we'd assume that he's Christian Bale from American Psycho.
Because it was like, we have that scene later on where he's having sex with that kind of stranger. We don't know her name or anything like that, do we? Just that stranger from the political meeting. He's kind of there, like watching himself in the mirror, like, yeah, I'm Tommy Carcetti.
Yeah, there you go, like, on the head right there. That's the ultimate scene for it, really. Yeah. So.
And the kind of expression that he pulls as he watches Jen pull away with the kids, and he has this slightly pinched expression before he turns around where he's like, yeah, I'm getting it all my own way. It's a real kind of look of determination and pleasure at the same time.
Yeah, I completely forget about Carcetti in these days. He really is pretty reprehensible. So, yeah, good to see it. I think it's later on, really, when Colvin shows him Amsterdam. They have their meeting at the end of the season, and all of a sudden, they focus on Carcetti's face for the whole time during that scene as he experiences Amsterdam, and you feel like his entire morality set changes from that point onwards, and it becomes more about the city than it does about him. It becomes more selfless. So we've got a little way to go yet before we lose the ego Carcetti.
So before we get too ahead of ourselves, should we move on to the next section?
So Burrell later meets with the Mayor, Parker, State Delegate Odell Watkins, and the State's Attorney Stephen Demper to discuss crime figures. While Burrell has delivered his promise to reduce felony rates, the murder rate continues to rise. Burrell blames the State's Attorney's casework. As everyone argues, Royce claims that they should at least pretend to be on the same side due to their elected and appointed positions. Parker jokingly remarks that they may have to get real jobs if they can't find it in themselves to get along. After Burrell and Demper leave, Watkins urges the Mayor to sack Burrell. The Mayor mentions Watkins' plans to install Marla Daniels in Unetta Perkins' city council seat and tells him that he always rewards loyalty in his people and will continue to support both Burrell and Perkins despite their lackluster performances. Lackluster even, sorry.
Another example here of that sort of dark humour being used to express how dysfunctional the whole system is. They have a similar thing where Bunny does his thought I might legalise drugs and everyone has a kind of ha 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 ha. Like,
yeah.
We are very knowing in that humour. And we have another thing here with where they're talking about them having to get real jobs. There's another dark bit of humour of rich, politically powerful people standing around a desk laughing about something they're all very sort of in on the joke on.
Yeah.
Like it's a very kind of typical scene of people in positions of power going, ah, ha, 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 ha.
Definitely, yeah. It's a little bit more on the nose than the Colvin one. But yeah, it certainly makes a point about the power again. It's all about the power plays this episode.
It seems to end too quickly as well. I don't know if it's meant to seem quite fake or quite stilted.
It came across
It certainly comes across that
cliche,
way.
Definitely, yeah. And I appreciated seeing Demper, though, in this scene. We saw him in Season 1. He's Rhonda's boss. He's the state's attorney, whereas she's the assistant state's attorney, or one of the assistants, and we learn that they struggle to convict a lot of the criminals arrested because of substandard evidence provided by the police department. And Burrell's trying to blame, the courts for this. So it's good to see that there's that power play going down as well, and we see how some of the cases in the past, I'm sure there have been cases in other seasons where there's been a real lack of evidence there. I think it was when Landsman tried to force the arrest of D'Angelo, is that right? Or tried to, something like that. They're just really pushing the evidence to go. And it's great because their stats gets a tick, whereas once it gets to court, whether they get convicted or not doesn't really matter anymore. So, it's in their interest to kind of go against each other there.
Yeah.
And we see how both Demper and Burrell are considered hacks by the higher-ups, particularly by, as you mentioned, Odell Watkins. But they mention how Demper has been elected, so he's got to stay, but Burrell could really do with a good firing. And Demper is actually eventually replaced next season by Rupert Bond, who turns out to be a very worthy replacement as the state's attorney and gives Rhonda a big boost. But, yeah. So it's good to see Watkins really trying to force some sturdy advice on Royce.
But generally, it seems that a lot of these scenes with Royce earlier on are just mainly about him wanting to draw a ring of loyalty around him in order to protect himself, in order to kind of, if there are any problems, he's got a selection of people who can take the fall for him because of their loyalty.
Yeah.
If he can engineer that, then he can protect himself. It's like ring of steel around Clarence Royce. He really tries very hard to create that, but it doesn't really come off for him.
Yeah, ain't a stupid man. But yeah, as you say, absolutely. And I'm sure one of those people is Unetta Perkins, as we see there's a discussion of here, which links directly back to that scene with Daniels and Burrell in episode 1. We see the mayor expressing his desire for Unetta to stay, despite Watkins really wanting Marla in there. We see those two chatting together right at the start of episode 1, actually, in the committee. I think it was the public safety committee. So it's good that all those things are connecting up, and we see some real nasty politics coming to a head here, and blocking off opportunities for people, just because power is wanted. So
yeah, that was about it.
Yeah, that's about
people making power moves.
Yeah.
So yeah, on to the next one.
Yes, so we have final politics. Carcetti attends a First District fundraiser with his wife and children. Burrell is in attendance as one of the few African Americans for hopes of improving his relationship with the First District politicians that he and Mayor Royce are not on great terms with, unlike in the other districts of the city. After Carcetti's wife and children go home early, Carcetti is seen committing adultery with a woman he noticed in the crowd.
So yeah, this is the first appearance of Jen Carcetti.
Yes.
Am I right in saying that?
We meet the family, that's right, yeah.
We kind of, it's suddenly, because it's not really spoken about at all until this point.
Yeah.
It's kind of like sprung on the audience that, oh, and by the way, he has family and kids. And almost immediately, no sooner are we introduced to them, we are introduced to Carcetti's, clearly lack of loyalty to his family. If we want to keep the loyalty thing going.
Yeah. I mean,
and Jen, on the other hand, is very loyal and is kind of clearly very trusting of him, allowing him to put a lot of time into his work and stay late and allow him to pursue all of this while she clearly does a lot of looking after the children and the like. So
it really does feel
not
like
a balanced relationship.
Yeah, his work comes before the family completely, and you get the sense that one of the major assets they are to him is being that political family that works well in the photo shoots, and they certainly paint them here as being that used for that purpose. The pretty family for the arm, and I mean, even during the only scene we see here really is Carcetti telling another kind of First District joke to his cronies, and then in the midst of eyeing up some candy across the way. So he's really kind of got his intentions all falsified in all parts of life, really.
Yeah, Carcetti's clearly got quite a few stories to tell people.
Yeah, and it's not.
We've seen his storytelling ability with Burrell already, and again here.
Both stories of which
stored up for PR events.
Definitely. Yeah. It's nice to see Burrell a little bit out of place as well, kind of just milling around, wondering what to do.
Yeah,
this ain't his
it's
district.
very awkward.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's good to see. I mean, Carcetti really is quite reprehensible here, at his lowest perhaps, and as you mentioned before, the way he stares into that camera after Jen and the kids leave is very maniacal and does really reek of American Psycho. So.
And then, because like I say, it moves on to that scene, moves on to the sex scene. He's just there, kind of like almost like he's making love to himself in that mirror.
Yeah.
The only thing is, like, she's just still between him and himself in a strange sort of way. This Narcissus falling in love with his own reflection.
Yeah.
I don't know if it goes quite that deep.
Very nicely put. I think that's what's going through his head, definitely. Yeah.
He's clearly on a high.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
No doubt about it. And typical Wire way.
Riding on his success.
Yeah. No lead up either. It's just straight in. Family leave. Let's cut to the chase. Which I always appreciate about the Wire sex scenes. They're very, cut out the fat.
And a lot of them also, they keep that. They go for that voyeuristic style, the shooting style of The Wire, the fact that it almost always creeps around doorways or windows or objects to kind of show us what's going on. There's only a couple of exceptions to that, but there is still maintaining that voyeuristic style, and we see it here as the camera slowly moves through the room and around the doorway to see them in the bathroom.
Yeah. Once you think about it in those terms, it becomes quite creepy, really, doesn't it? But
yeah, it is. It's quite I think it makes it strangely unsettling in a way,
yeah.
And why it reminded me of American Psycho in that way.
Yeah,
it's certainly when you watch it in a particular light, it comes across quite differently.
Definitely. Okay, so that's our politics. Let's quickly go on to our Barksdale, and Omar is thrown in here as well. So Omar's crew scopes out a Barksdale stash house. Omar notices their increased defences, but assures his team it will be easier to take in the morning. Kimmy questions Omar's vendetta against the Barksdale organisation, and he refuses to give his reasons.
So just that short opening bit, pre-gunfight.
That's right, yeah.
Pre-altercation. This is Omar, just sticking to his principles, I guess, and it's slightly foolish of him. I thought there was maybe a bit of a parallel here of Omar sticking to his principles. It's about the idea of them fighting against him and he has to hit them rather than all these other stash houses that they could get. Why does it matter when they're in a sea of stash houses? And then later on, we have McNulty talking about the service weapon that the higher-ups are determined to find in a sea of weapons. Why does one standard issue 9mm matter so much?
Very, very good point.
And similarly, the answer is just because.
Yeah.
That's the way it is. That's the way it's got to be. So it seems like a bit of a parallel there for the principles.
Yeah, although I guess they're very different principles behind them.
With
very different. Dozeman's gun, it's all about saving face, whereas with Omar, it's sweet revenge, I guess. Pure and
damaging
simple.
Face.
Yeah. Because, indeed, I like that. That's the only reason you need.
Yeah.
And it's clear that Omar's crew do not know the full story behind his revenge vendetta on the Barksdales. He hasn't really unearthed that rock. He must be kind of internalizing it completely, really. And we see the Barksdales are making ready for the man more effectively than they were last time. And Omar proves to be the most patient man in Baltimore and has this time had to spend a couple of days kind of observing their patterns before he's confident to go back for the next steal. So clearly we're no longer in the territory of the last episode where he made a complete mockery of them. Yeah,
it's a big shift, given the fact that last time he was essentially playing dress up to go in there, and it was easy as that.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be all fun and games. And in fact, here, well, I won't go into it too much because we'll cover it. But we really see him in a position of vulnerability like never before here.
Yeah, definitely.
But we'll go into that later. I won't do it until we've done the next bit.
You're going to have to wait a little bit longer, I'm afraid, because we're going to go to the Prop Joe scene. So Stringer is called to meet Prop Joe downtown on a rainy night. Joe tells Stringer about the major case unit tipping their hand by bringing in Cheese and telling him about the wire, all over the shooting of Cheese's pet dog. Joe warns Stringer to keep things boring to keep police attention away from them. And then we go into the whole... Actually, should we chat about this now? We'll chat about just the Prop Joe scene, then we'll go into the big Omar shootout.
This is, for me, in terms of learning Prop Joe as a character, this seems like quite a big scene for him. He has quite a few little nuggets of wisdom here, and police don't get wet, and keep things dead boring, and all these kind of like Prop Joe-isms. I feel like there's such a slew of them in this scene for him that part of me felt like this was quite defining.
Yeah, he certainly makes his mark on... This is his first scene in season 3 even, and he's really aware of the additional police presence on the street since last year. I like that he's cut his hair back and sporting a good old afro now. Kind of keeps things fresh for him, and I like that the police presence gives him an excuse to meet by City Hall, and the shot of those two, Stringer and Prop Joe, framed between the City Hall spire really evokes a nice image for the show. Evoking those power plays and also emphasising the cross-institutional links between politics and the street, etc. So it's great. Kind of links to the ambitions and Stringer's ambition to get to know the politicians as well. And so it's a really nice scene, really nicely put together. And we also see boredom being the way forward, as we mentioned. Yeah, so.
He orders Stringer to keep it very boring.
We're reminded, I guess, here how Stringer's had it easy the past couple of years too. Like little investigative police interest, and Prop Joe's only been seeing lots of it since the spike in violence on his side of the town. So they're perhaps getting a little bit rusty on the whole muscle up thing. As we see, I mean, the Barksdale's idea of muscling is playing video games before they eventually get a visit from Omar. So should we move on to that segment? Have you anything else to say about Prop Joe? Okay, sure. Right, so the next day, Omar's crew make their move against the heavily guarded stash house. Tosha poses as a mother looking for a lost child and gets close enough to disarm Gerard, the guard at the front door. Omar's team subdue the two guards downstairs, one of whom is a long-time Barksdale bodyguard, Perry, and they check that the upstairs door is locked. Gerard shows them the stash, which is hidden behind a plasterboard that's screwed in place. He begins to unscrew it. The noise alerts Tank downstairs, who's guarding the back of the house. He sports Omar's team through the window and signals Slim Charles upstairs by throwing clothespins. Tank then moves around the side of the building with a young enforcer named Sapper. As Omar makes his exit, the upstairs door is unlocked. Omar shoots the door and hurries his crew outside. They then get pinned down behind a parked car, and when they make a move to their own vehicle, Dante accidentally hits Tosha with a stray round. Kimmy stops in the middle of the street and shoots Tank. Omar grabs Kimmy and bundles her into the car, and they make their escape.
A rare piece of unbroken action in The Wire, which obviously we don't get to see very often, but this is a really, really good scene. And we see how difficult it is for Omar this time around. Like we said before, he made a bit of a mockery of them last time. But we see him really vulnerable here, the way he's like scrabbling to reload his shotgun, and kind of, we don't normally see him this heated. Normally he seems very calm, very collected. He's in control of the situation. And in here, he's pinned down behind a car, and the way they kind of push the boards off those windows and lean out the windows to fire, it has an almost like Western-style shootout feel to it. Shootout at the Fayette Corral or something. So,
yeah.
So yeah, I thought this was a really, really nice scene, kind of emphasised the vulnerability of Omar here, that he isn't bulletproof. And we mentioned before how there was the shootout, I think it was right at the start of season 3, I think it was season 2, but how reckless they were with their guns. The way they just kind of like throw them about and shoot. There isn't really like a military style training way of shooting that they've got going on there. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about guns, but they don't look like they're handling them like professionals.
No. And
the way that Dante just kind of sticks the gun behind his head and shoots without looking. I mean, that's one hell of a way for Tosha to go.
Yeah.
Him, I was like, what kind of idiot just points a gun over their shoulder when they've got someone sort of on their side directly behind them? That's just utter stupidity in carrying a firearm.
I don't know.
And then we see how that's then kind of put into the minds of kids as Bunk gets there later on. We see kids kind of wanting to be the ones with the guns and showing off, and then when they end up in that situation themselves, maybe they feel like they understand how it works. That's you got to have a firearm, but they don't seem to learn how to use them properly. And in this instance, it just causes the most bizarre death.
Yeah, it is. It is strange. You've got to remember that I guess that Dante is in a real sticky moment here. He's fearing for his life. What's the only way to stop these guys shooting at me? Shoot back at them. And I don't really have time to turn around and take aim and the rest of it. Otherwise, I will be dead. But I'm just going to try my best to suppress them a little bit. And oh, sorry, Tosha, you're gone. It's unfortunate, but I can kind of see, what happened there. It was certainly what they weren't expecting. I mean, the lack of expectation of it made it even worse for him. So,
none of them really acknowledged that it was. I think in the first time you watch this episode, it isn't clear that that's what happens, because it's a very quick edit that's going on. That kind of when you watch it, it's sort of you can see it, but on a first time viewing, I think it's less obvious because none of the characters at any point bring it up again. They don't kind of like chastise Dante for it or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it's that's just kind of the end of it. I mean, I guess, like you say, for those reasons, due to the panic of the situation and it is a combat scenario, it's quite hard to think straight if you're just a kind of person with a gun, essentially. Even if you're used to the street, I guess they can accept that. They can accept that's a hazard of the job.
Certainly. I do think there is a scene where Kimmy can't forgive Dante, though. I think there is some friction that comes later on and Omar tries to break it up. Obviously, in this episode, it was just kind of everyone's emotions brewing and there was very little spoken. I think Omar just kind of stubs out a cigarette in his hand and continues crying. But yeah, later on, I think that there is some friction that comes to a head, so it'd be good to see what happens there. I don't quite remember the ins and outs of it. But it was good. I mean, the fight overall was good. It's probably the most extended or most epic, I should say, period of drama in The Wire or action in The Wire in the whole show. I can't think of a kind of a more grandiose one, particularly with those guys who suddenly pop out of the boards in the top floor and just kind of start pounding, as you said, kind of like opening the saloon bar, Western style, and just emptying all the loads into Omar. It really was a scary moment for them, and anything really could have happened at that point, which was what was so great about it. And
the fact that the product that they're supposedly busting them for isn't even really that important, because the moment Omar realizes that they're in trouble, he just drops them and runs. He's not there for that. He's not there to protect it. He's just like, right, it's not worth this. Let's just get out of here.
Yeah, it's not about what you're taking, it's about who you're taking it from. And there we see it, yeah. So I think it was kind of good to see, despite them lazing around playing video games, it was good to see that they had some brains when it came to the storage of the drugs. I don't know if it was intentional, but using the nail gun to secretly alert the crew to a stick-up, if that's what their intention was. Perhaps they have a stash that's just kind of behind a floorboard, and then the other stash is behind this plasterboard, which they have to use a drill to get out, and that drill alerts people outside. It's kind of like a warning sign that someone's sticking me up. And if that's what they intended to do, it was quite genius. They certainly outsmarted Omar.
Yeah.
So it worked really well. I like the whole sequence of them gradually cottoning on, and we see how things are really looking bad for Omar and his crew.
And then those clothes pegs he throws at the upstairs window to alert more upstairs and get that door unlocked.
Definitely. So I think there's perhaps a nice symbolism of the comparison with Barksdale's and Stanfield's, where we see that the Barksdales are kind of unscrewing things, and the Stanfields will later use nail guns to actually screw things in. So they're kind of going against each other completely in the way they run the street. So a good scene overall. And we see that even Omar's shotgun is really not useful here. He's way too far away from things, which he certainly didn't imagine to be.
Mind you, I don't think I'd want to be anywhere even close to a shotgun. I wouldn't feel safer just because I was 20 feet away.
No, true that. But I mean, we saw that on the street there was about 98% inaccuracy. I think about 2 bullets hit out of the hundreds fired. So you'd probably do better with a pistol in that situation. Just about.
Well, that's very true of combat in general.
Yeah.
The vast majority of all shots fired in combat, in like the military world, is they're all misses because it's all for suppressing, and it's very hard to accurately hit people at long distances and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So
it's refreshing to see that in the show as well. Like it felt very uncharacteristic of most kind of police shootout scenes with all the inaccuracies going on.
And although there are very few action scenes, it really maintains that level of realism. You really do feel like it's something really quite serious going on. Like, combat is not stylized, or characters aren't bigged up to be able to do incredible things that are, there isn't some hero with some special move that brings people down. You can just get shot and killed in an instant, and it all happens too fast to even comprehend.
Yeah. And
there's a lot of very quick cuts, and like I say, when you first watch it, it's quite hard to tell exactly that's exactly what's happened to Tasha.
Yeah, that's true. It's not an obvious friendly fire, is it, at all?
Yeah. I feel like another show would have maybe emphasised that more in order to increase the sort of gasp effect, the look what's happened.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it's almost like it's really sort of not emphasising, it's really going for the element of accident. And that you don't even spot it that well. So
definitely,
just a different take.
Yeah. All right. So, anything else on that shootout, or?
No, I think that's about it. Really. All right.
Let's move on to the next one. So, after the robbery, Slim Charles brings his soldiers to meet with Stringer to report what happened. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, I think this is it. This is either them reporting what happened with them and the Stanfields, because there's a bit where they get beaten up by the Stanfields, and there's also a bit where I think this is to do with the gunfight, actually. So after the robbery, Slim Charles brings his soldiers to meet with Stringer to report what happened. Stringer is disappointed in them and his business lately. During the meeting, Donette phones Shamrock, trying to get in touch with Stringer, and he refuses to talk to her. Stringer orders his enforcers to cover Tosha's funeral in case Omar shows up. Donette continues to try to get in touch with Stringer through Shamrock. So I guess we can kind of call this scene the 40-degree day scene. That's kind of what it's known as.
Yeah, it's quite an amusing scene in a way.
I don't ever feel like this analogy that Stringer comes up with worked. I'm not a real big fan of the 40-degree day. But I guess
Especially after he's been told to keep it boring.
Yeah.
Surely the 40-degree day that's boring that no one gives a fuck about is exactly what he wants if he wants to follow through on what Prop Joe is telling him.
Absolutely. I guess.
Whereas big things happening and it causing a big problem is not boring.
It doesn't.
Surely that
quite
should be
make
cold.
sense.
Shouldn't that be 20?
Yeah, it just doesn't quite make sense, does it?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's a bit of a, I don't know, maybe I'm missing something there, but
I quite appreciate the nice attempt at humour with I think it's either Gerard or Sapper, kind of reiterating what he said, like a 40-degree day, and it doesn't quite hit. But yeah, it's one of the few Stringer speeches that I'm not totally okay with. I can't really explain it because I'm not really sure I understand it to begin with, but it doesn't quite just ring true for whatever reason. So. We see, obviously, Donette trying to get in touch as well, pursuing him for ages. I feel like this goes on for a long time, and we see Stringer reject the call for a few episodes. I do wonder why he does this. Is it because he's reminded of D'Angelo, he doesn't want to be, or is it not going to let any sort of relationship get in the way of what he wants to achieve? I actually forgot. I know he does answer her call eventually, but we'll have to see.
just doesn't have time for that now, I guess.
No.
It's not, doesn't want to put any time into it.
Not at all.
Very distracted.
Definitely. Okay, let's finish off the Barksdales. So, meanwhile, Omar's crew mourn their loss at the hideout. Omar takes responsibility for Tosha's death, and Kimmy sullenly tells him his apology does nothing for her. Omar mourns Tosha's death from across the street, hiding in the shadows from Slim Charles and the other Barksdale soldiers.
So a bit of another possible parallel here between the two wakes, because we see Cole's later on, and we see that Tosha's is empty and Cole's is kind of absolutely rammed.
Yeah.
There's kind of one of them protected by these soldiers, just kind of casing the funeral, so no one can turn up if they dare. So,
although Slim Charles seems to pay some sort of respect as he wanders through. And he really wanders through the corridor like a don, with an incredible kind of strut to his step that doesn't quite feel real, but kind of fits his character very well.
Yeah, Slim Charles is quite the character.
He's just so cool, and he does seem to pay some sort of respect to Tosha very subtly. And it as you say, kind of deliberately comes quite soon after Cole's wake, where it's a completely different story.
Yeah.
And the idea that that it's just no friends out on the street.
So Omar kind of trying to take the rap for what happened, accepting it as his responsibility, because it was all about his face-off with the Barksdales, and I guess he felt like he had dragged them into it.
Yeah.
He had kind of made them his soldiers by trying to make him part of this personal army for his vendetta against the Barksdales, and he dragged them into that, didn't offer any explanations. And somebody ended up getting killed over it. So I guess he's trying to take the hit for that, and he takes it pretty hard at pressing that cigarette into his hand, which is pretty dramatic. So
yeah, he really drags on it beforehand. Like he gets a real lungful. I could manage that, but the cigarette burn looks incredibly real. I don't know how they managed to do that, but maybe someone did take the hit there. But it was.
He just looks so wounded, sort of lying there, pressing it into his hand. He's got this big scar across his chest and across his face, and there's no pained expression.
And that dingy room that he's just sort of lying in and squatting in, really.
After seeing Omar in such a position of power and being so confident and cocksure and delivering all these zingers and getting people to the point where they're the ones with their hands up in a position of vulnerability, now we see him really down, well, not even down on his luck, I suppose you could say, but he's the one that's really taken the fall now.
Definitely, yeah. So
it's kind of nice to see that he's not always being bigged up all the time.
Yeah, this is his first real hurdle in the show, isn't it? It's the first time he's underestimated the Barksdales. They certainly got ready for the man. They heeded Stringer's advice, and it's good to see Omar in a slightly different situation now. And I think that this actually breaks up their union with obviously Tosha's already gone, but I think Kimmy kind of parts ways with them after this. It really does have a big effect on the whole Omar strand through the show. So it's a big kind of moment for them.
Yeah, they're maybe thinking he's not quite as neutral as he used to be.
Nope, lets emotions get in the way.
Yeah, as soon as he builds up that vendetta, the whole principles seem to come falling down a bit.
Definitely. And I thought it was quite cool seeing one of the final parts of right at the end again in the funeral home. We see, I think it's Slim Charles goes out the front, and we see this kind of sports car pass through. I like to think that's Carcetti on the way home from his fundraiser, because it comes directly after that scene with Carcetti in the mirror. I don't know if it is, but it'd be nice to create that kind of again, those references between the institutions.
That's a nice thought. I hadn't considered that.
Because they really make a point of this car just jetting through. It'd be nice if they showed a scene of him getting into that same car, perhaps. Yeah. So, and odd that they went for that same cliffhanger ending. It feels like we've been here before, like 2 or 3 times, with Omar just waiting by a Barksdale joint, like with a cigarette in hand, just kind of hyperventilating, getting ready to go crazy and grab some more revenge. So they kind of go back to that well quite a few times.
Yeah, a path well travelled.
Yeah.
So that's about it for the Barksdale organisation, I think.
Yeah.
We'll be touching on a couple of those bits and pieces as we go into Homicide, I'm guessing.
Yes, definitely. So that's what we're off to now. So Jimmy McNulty takes the D'Angelo Barksdale file to Bunk to ask for his opinion. McNulty notices a beaten suspect in the interrogation room, and Bunk tells him that he's the drug dealer who confessed to shooting Officer Dozeman. When McNulty asks if the confession came before or after the beatdown, Bunk replied that he arrested the dealer in East Baltimore and had the police car made an unscheduled tune-up stop at the Western District. Colonel Raymond Forster interrupts to tell Bunk that his work on the Dozeman shooting is not over and that he needs to locate the weapon.
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit before, didn't we? We were talking about that the principal would need to get hold of that service weapon. And another, yet more emphasis on the dysfunction of the police institution. Bunk talking very candidly about the whole tale of getting them up to this tune-up shop. And it's very dark in that garage or whatever he says. Like, it's just joking about going and beating up this guy in order to get a confession out of him. Like, it's really quite dark and sinister, especially after we see how beaten up and bloody this guy is, just left alone in the interrogation room, not even appearing to be conscious. And McNulty's facial expression as he come past it is like, well, there's another one. Like,
yeah, they make it very clear that this is a standard issue response to a cop shooter from the start, don't they?
Yeah.
And I think we see it again in Season 1 when pretty much the whole detail descends onto one interrogation room and beats the crap. Is it out of Bird? I think Bird really riles up Keema and they just beat the crap out of him. It's pretty heavy stuff.
I'm sure if Daniels were privy to all of this, he wouldn't be very happy.
No.
Forced to telling him we got to let him know who we are.
Yeah.
I mean, who are we exactly? We are people who go around beating others up.
Yeah.
We're there to protect and serve, but also beat the crap out of you if we don't like you.
There we go, well said. And we see Bunk writing around his injuries, similarly to how McNulty wrote around his solicitation of prostitution on the job. Quite nice, the fruity language used. But Bunk seems pretty proud overall of what he did to that boy, the scheduled tune-up. There's a certain kind of swagger to the way he talks about it.
Yeah, he doesn't seem quite so bothered by it.
No.
He's very accustomed to, like you say, it being a very standard response to somebody who's harming a cop. So
yeah,
he's clearly on board with it.
And then, of course, we descend into their different takes on the D'Angelo case. And as we might expect, Bunk's very much a man who works within the system. He wants to do the right thing, but like Freeman, he only wants to make the case if the case is there to make. So particularly when Command is wanting less murders, he's saying, stay away from this, this prior year murder. We don't want it open again. Or prior year suicide into a murder. It's a little bit like the start of Season 2, trying to turn dead women into murders. It's not popular anywhere you go.
Yeah, McNulty trying to create cases out of nothing.
Yep.
Just to kind of prove how clever he is and the fact that he's figured it out and he's unearthed the real truth and maybe deliver some harsh truths to a couple of people in the process.
Absolutely. And again,
He does look very disparagingly at those state police as he kind of sees, like, he just looks at them as if, like, you honestly couldn't figure this one out. Right?
yeah. Yeah, ridiculous, isn't it? And, yeah, so there's McNulty. And I quite like Bunk's sarcasm on, the whole, even the United Nations should get involved in this case. That kind of tickled me a little bit. And Bunk, he knew D'Angelo, but he doesn't see it as a case to reopen. There's not so much of an attachment there as McNulty has. But I guess overall McNulty's just a bit bored. I mean, the case that's happening with the major details going nowhere, and McNulty, rather than remaining loyal to his group, is just going to go off and do his own thing to satisfy his egotistical requirements.
Doesn't he say something like Kofi Bryant or something?
That rings a bell. I don't know why he said that or in what context, but I do remember that being said. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some kind of bit where he says something about, he thinks that, because he says the UN and Kofi Bryant should get involved, but isn't Kofi, well, at the time, Kofi Annan was the president of the United Nations, wasn't he?
Okay.
Don't know why he says Kofi Bryant. Some kind of mix up with Kobe Bryant, I guess, the basketball player.
Oh. No idea, really. I mean, we are going back to 2004 here. So.
Pretty sure it's Kofi Annan.
Was that what it was? Okay. Yeah. And I guess it's nice to see the another comparison. I guess painting McNulty's case in better light is when Forster comes along and really shows us a case that's not worth pursuing in the slightest. The retrieval of Forster's weapon, and all of a sudden McNulty's D'Angelo case seems like a real worthwhile pursuit by comparison. So they're really showing us a big spectrum of police cases here.
By the way, Kofi Annan says here is a Ghanaian diplomat who served as the 7th Secretary General of the United Nations from January 1997 to December 2006.
6 was that?
2006, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, he would have been Secretary General at the time.
All right, Kofi Annan. Maybe Bunk's just making mistakes and.
Yeah, maybe it's just like a joke, kind of. Maybe jokingly getting the name wrong.
It was there for us to trip him up, I guess, and to notice that. It's quite odd.
All right, shall we move on to the next part of Homicide?
So, final part of Homicide. Bunk checks the name Peanut and finds 87 matches in the system, all number 1 males, which is the BPD numerical description of African American men. Detective Holly laughs at Bunk's misfortune. Holly then gets a call himself, the shooting of Tank and Tosha. Holly manages to convince Bunk to be the primary as he already has another case. Holly accompanies Bunk to the crime scene as the assisting detective, while there Bunk is sympathetic for Tosha, believing that she was caught in the crossfire, as the police put it, a taxpayer. Bunk is also dismayed when he notices African American children pretending to be Omar, seeing them act out the shooting. As Bunk ties up his case notes at the office, Jay Landsman corners him to insist he get back to work on finding the bloody gun.
Well, he doesn't say the bloody gun, because that's not something that an American would likely ever say.
But,
get that bloody gun!
It certainly, certainly conveyed my frustration with the bloody gun. Or Doberman's gun.
Yeah, the gun. It's always back on the gun.
Yeah.
Get the bloody gun, McNulty. Not McNulty. Bunk.
Yeah, wherever he looks, he can't escape the gun.
And it's like later on, when isn't it a much later on in a later episode where he's like on the corner speaking to someone, and Landsman literally just rides up and it's just like, you're not looking for the gun. Like,
the only time Landsman leaves the office is when he wants Bunk to find a gun.
Yeah. We see him out and about in natural light. That's quite rare.
He probably spent 2 hours looking for Bunk. Every street corner in Baltimore was canvassed before he found him.
Yeah, it's really impressive.
Yeah.
It's just got him tracked. So, yeah. We see that the Peanut is clearly a very common name on the street. Bunk makes a rather interesting reference to George Washington Carver. Is that what he says?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I didn't dig into these references. Please elucidate.
I think George Washington Carver invented a load of stuff that had peanuts in it.
Okay.
He was made load of products from peanuts. or something like that. So that's why it's when he's looking over Peanuts and he's like, do I look like George Washington Carver?
Not Reese then. Not Reese's peanut butter cups.
George Washington Carver. Is Reese a person?
I don't know. Probably not, but he's at least a chocolate bar.
See, I think that's what it was. You could always look at it on like Wikipedia or something. Double check it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a nice little, very, very sort of esoteric reference there.
Yeah, and certainly a good spot. But I did like the how they were just, again, it comes back to the politics of the homicide rotation. They have a few scenes where they kind of argue over who should take the next case, and we see that Ray Cole has got his hands full, and we're reminded of how sudden his death is. Like he's just taken a case on, and like 3 scenes later he seems to drop dead at the gym. So that's a real reminder for the rewatcher of how fragile that guy's life is, or how sudden the death takes him. And I guess we then go on the scene. We see that they kind of come to a compromise that they should both work the case together and lighten the load for each other, I guess, if they can't come to an agreement. Bunk spies Kennard amongst another bunch of kids. Our first appearance of Kennard. One of the most despicable characters in the show, making his debut appearance. Stood next to a kid dressed up as Omar in a trench coat and a fake shotgun. So,
and then of course he wants to pretend to be Kennard.
Be Omar even, yeah.
Be Omar, sorry. Kennard wants to pretend to be Omar, and then he ends up being the one that kills him.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So it's just really, really kind of painted out ahead of time.
But we see Bunk being simultaneously impressed and disgusted, I think, by what Kennard's up to here. Like the audience, probably impressed with the profile that Omar holds, that he's just kind of revered on the street, but also completely disgusted that his behaviour is resonating with the whole community. Omar
makes it pretty clear amongst his code that every man must have, that he never puts his gun on any citizen, that he's doesn't want to harm any citizens or taxpayers, I suppose the police would put it. It's all about people that are in the game, people that are doing some kind of morally reprehensible thing, selling the drugs and whatever. But by his actions out here on the street and this gunfight that he gets into, one could argue that it does have harm. It has harm on these kids who then kind of glorify this violence. Like, they're not horrified by it. They're like inspired by it.
Yeah.
They kind of want to be that person.
It's my turn.
And I know that
Omar.
young kids, I mean, when you're young and you're impressionable, and especially boys, when goodness knows I was like that, you do kind of like the whole shooting military kind of thing. That's very much why so many shooting video games are popular, because it's like reliving some childhood dream of getting to be an army man without any of the real danger. But these kids there's a slight, even greater loss of innocence here because they're so close to where this is going on, and we've seen already that kids can be hit by stray rounds of this happening. So, yeah, there is an element that certain harm comes to the streets of Baltimore and thus the people that witness it. So whilst he's not directly putting his guns on any citizens, he's still having an impact on those that are witnessing his actions. And in the case of the young children, actually idolising them.
Yeah.
In really quite a scary way. And Bunk sees that, and he seems kind of horrified by it too.
Yeah, and he even goes and finds Omar later on just to tell him how disgusted he is. Which leads to a pretty great conversation between the two of them. One of the most revered scenes in the show, actually, which we'll get to in a couple of weeks' time.
Yep.
And we also see Landsman make his first appearance in this season, making it clear that the choice between the peanut and the gun, or the real taxpayer murder that's just arrived on the desk, is a very clear one, and that you should go and chase the gun.
It's like that Tasha's disguise as the mother looking for her child also goes the way to fool the police into thinking that she was an innocent bystander.
Yeah, definitely.
Just because she wasn't dressed up like someone that would normally go and rob a stash house.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of nice how that fooled them too.
Absolutely. So it's good to see, and thankfully Landsman's subsequent appearance in this episode has him speaking a bit more nobly, speaking a bit more sense at Ray Cole's wake. But we'll get to that soon.
I think that's about it for Homicide.
Yeah, let's heading over to the major case unit. There's another couple of sections here. So firstly, with the wires dead, we now pick up Sorry, 1 second. Yep, so with the wires dead, Lieutenant Daniels convenes a meeting to discuss moving his team onto the Northwestern District to pursue a new target, Kintel Prince K. Williamson, who has control of several drug corners and is implicated in some homicide investigations in the Northwest. Daniels notes McNulty's absence. Greggs is skeptical of their reasons for ceasing the Barksdale Prop Joe investigation and decries the value of their new target. When the meeting is adjourned, Prez says that Greggs embodied the spirit of McNulty.
Yeah, well, it's nice that straight after that we find out where McNulty really is, because it's after that we see him at the prison.
Yeah.
I thought that was a nice way to move forward. But bringing it back to the start of that scene, we obviously have Daniels trying to take quite a pragmatic approach with the major case unit, keeping all of the, I suppose, going for the drug stuff, all the murder, all the drug-related murders even, and keeping that the focus and not going after Stringer just because there isn't really a case to be made. And we see that divide where Freeman sticks his heels in. Normally we'd expect him to have a slightly rebellious streak as established before, but here he's quite happy to toe the line because he feels like it's right. He feels like it's important to chase cases that are actually there. Yeah.
And as noble as his intentions are, he is also very much about balancing it with, compliance with the higher ups. There's no playing
exactly. Yeah.
There's no playing the big man. There's no playing fire with the bosses here like McNulty gets up to. So it's good to see. And the new target, Kintel Williamson, yeah, is that right, Williamson?
Yeah.
And the way
Prince K.
That's right, Prince K. So I don't think we ever see this character in the show. Speaking perhaps of his importance in the overall scheme of things on the street, but it's certainly a mid-level target for them to deal with. The sort of person that if they catch will probably be replaced within a couple of days, unfortunately. But
yeah,
they're interested in him because he's dropping bodies and murders is the mandate at the moment. And I always thought that there's those two Barksdale boys that we kind of follow through season 3. One of them has long dreadlocky hair, and one of them is I think he's the 40-degree day guy, who's kind of meant to play a little bit of the fool. He's meant to be a little bit of a Herc in the Herc and Carver scenario. He always looked like the dreadlock. I think it's Sapper. I think his name is Sapper. The dreadlock guy in Barksdale.
Isn't that Gerard and Sapper?
That's right. Gerard and Sapper are the names. When they have the picture of Kintel Williamson on the board, I always assumed that was Sapper. So I got quite confused through a lot of season 3 that I thought that was the guy they were chasing.
Well, I think Sapper is the other one, the one without dreadlocks.
Okay.
Sapper is the guy who's like 40-degree day joke guy. Gerard is the one with the dreadlocks.
Right. Okay, that's cleared up. So Gerard. So I thought that Kintel was Gerard because they do look very similar on the if you compare the picture with the character.
Well, it's a really small photo. I mean, you can't really see any detail on it. So
definitely, but I guess the dreadlocks give it away for me. My simple analysis. But yeah, I don't think we ever actually meet the Kintel guy. He's just kind of a distraction rather than a character. And makes it even more confusing because I think they instantly cut to a dreadlocked Gerard after that with Tosha. Because Tosha brings the lost kid poster up to him. And we're like, oh, is that Kintel? No, it's not. It's just another Barksdale. So, yeah, that was kind of...
Daniels is... With Daniels going to those Comstat meetings and him seeing what happens when people don't toe the line, I guess he's thinking about in ways in which he can really justify that major case unit.
Yeah.
He knows that it's not a time to be making big moves like that because it's exactly the point at which it's most likely to get you screwed.
Yeah, I feel like it was the higher-ups that gave him Kintel. They said, you're going to have to follow this guy now. He's the one that's dropping the bodies.
Yeah.
So it's almost like he didn't really have a choice in the matter, and he was as frustrated as the rest of them that they didn't get to finish what they started with Prop Joe, but that's just the way it goes. And there's the moment with Greggs filling in for McNulty quite clearly. Didn't really need Didn't really need Prez to rub it in, but it certainly makes the point more obvious that Greggs is learning from McNulty and filling in for him in his absence.
Well, she even says later on, God, I'm becoming McNulty.
Yeah, they're really kind of piling that transition onto it, aren't they? Like they're really making it clear.
So yeah, that's that little bit.
Yeah, so then we move on to McNulty, who's half there because he cares about D'Angelo and half there because he's attention-seeking protest maneuver more than anything, I guess. But he's on another case, and he's away visiting the prison to review the evidence in D'Angelo's file. He mocks up the murder scene and shows that the belt is likely too long for D'Angelo to have killed himself using it. Later, McNulty explains his absence to Rhonda Perlman. Freeman and Greggs over drinks. McNulty's angry about their change in direction, and Freeman tells him that Daniels has earned their loyalty. McNulty and Greggs continue to drink after the bar closes, and she raises her relationship problems. They decide to cruise the Western to see what has changed since the towers fell, instead of focusing on Quintel. Out on patrol the next day, McNulty is unfamiliar with the Fruit's crew, but recognizes some faces from Bodie's. They remark on the quietness of the territory. Then McNulty learns that Ray Cole has died while exercising at the gym.
Yeah, we briefly mentioned it earlier. McNulty giving the two state police a bit of a look as if they probably should have figured that out for themselves. He was talking about them supposedly botching it. Well, I guess he was somewhat right about that one.
Yeah, it's a classic wire visual investigation scene, using the camera work to tell the story and not having to fill in the gaps with pointless dialogue. And it's nice to see that McNulty's instantly not convinced, nor is anyone else in that room, to be honest, but they'd rather probably stay away from the work than think about it logically. And I like that McNulty sees that the knot that's been tied in the belt is not the sort that you can kind of tighten and slide along the rope, which instantly shows that that was something that was overlooked by whoever staged the murder, that they should have really tied in a knot that you could adjust and tighten up. So I like to think that his time on the boat taught him that the Baltimore knot and all that perhaps was the thing that helped him crack this case.
Yeah, that's good actually. A nice sort of knots reference for McNulty. That's good. McNulty also he pulls a little bit of a face when Rhonda refers to Daniels as Cedric.
So Rhonda, yeah, I guess that is a telling sign, isn't it? That things have.
She calls him Cedric, which is obviously quite a personal way to refer to someone who otherwise is supposed to be just, she's acting as the assistant state's attorney in capacity for the major case unit.
Yeah.
Then this sort of first name, very impersonal basis to other characters.
I don't know. They seem so friendly, don't they? Well, I guess it's just in this culture, everyone's known by their surname in pretty much every walk. So yeah, that's a good thing. I hadn't actually noticed that. So nicely done.
And then we have the bit with McNulty and Greggs, and they're kind of out on the sort of. Normally we'd expect Bunk and McNulty to be in this position, but instead we have Greggs. We see Greggs coming back from, I assume, urinating in the bushes.
That's right. From the sounds of it, that's
really
what was
emphasising that tomboy,
the masculine
part.
Replacing Bunk for the moment while Bunk's buried under all the paperwork of the murders. So it's nice to go back out to the train tracks. We haven't been there for a while, and they're just kind of talking about how similar their situations are at the moment with regard to their personal life versus their work life, and
bonding over their lack of commitment to their partners.
Yeah,
ex-partner in one and soon to be ex in the other.
Yeah, true that. And then of course they do what they like to do best, where they kind of feel that they're most useful, I guess. They decide to drive out to the Western and survey the scene. And it's good that they spot Bodie. I guess they just haven't seen Bodie in a couple of years because they've been focusing on the Eastern and the docks and the rest of it. And they see that, he's now climbed a few ranks and he's getting in quite seniorly, or at least what gives off an air of seniority, getting in and out of these jeeps to go and speak to Stringer or whoever, and report back from the street. So he's clearly climbed a few ranks, and that certainly piques their interest.
Yes, it then kind of comes to the bit where he just learns that Ray Cole has died. I guess it has to arrive at some point, but slightly quiet moment for the two of them, so he gets the call then and learns about it, and obviously is very bothered by just how almost mundane it seems, just on a Stairmaster. And suddenly he's gone. What did... because obviously the reason why Ray Cole dies here is because, sadly, the character that plays him was also a seriously important part of the show. Robert F. Colesbury, who David Simon credited as pretty much the originator of the visual style of The Wire. He actually passed away in real life, so he kind of dies off screen as a character.
Yeah.
Do you know what happened to him? I kind of had a brief glance at like his Wikipedia page, but it didn't really say anything.
Yeah, I'm having.
I guess it doesn't really matter, but it's sad either way.
Yeah, it's it doesn't really say, does it? What caused it? Yeah, it's just not mentioned on his Wikipedia page. I guess that's more kind of confidential information. But he did die off screen in the show while exercising. I don't know if that's got anything to do with it, but the wake certainly acts as just as much as a memorial for the character as it does for the actor. So it's good to see that. And yeah, it was tragic really. He directed the finale of season 2, and that was the last episode of The Wire he lived to see. Before season 3 got going, he'd passed away, unfortunately. So yeah, it's pretty sad stuff, and it's nice that the show really does make a big thing of remembering him through the wake scene, which is a fantastic scene, which we'll get to soon. He's
the first name in the credits at the end as well.
Oh, okay, yeah. Is it in memory of Robert Colesbury? Is that what?
I don't know if it says in memory. I think it just kind of lists his position on the show, but he's kind of listed as the first name in the credits. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's good.
So yeah, that's that.
I don't know if they sprung that death in the show as just to rub in the point of how unviolent the Western's been recently, and people are dying in the police force rather than on the street now that Stringer and Prop Joe are in bed together.
So I guess that would lead us down to Cole's wake itself.
Yeah, very nearly. I guess we just didn't quite chat about the bar scene with Freeman and the rest of them. I guess there's not much to say there, but Freeman is admirably fighting Daniels' corner, which is nice to see. And he's explaining, a little bit like Bunk did earlier, how he's all for the best case when it's there, which McNulty just can't see. He always has to be chasing the guy most worthy of being chased. So it's certainly a tricky situation, and we see Freeman and McNulty really getting a bit of friction heading up between them. It's been brewing for a little bit, and I think next episode it's really going to come to logheads. But yeah, so
yeah.
That's the major case unit. Let's quickly move on to Cole's wake. So at Cole's wake at Kavanaugh's bar, Landsman delivers a eulogy with Cole's body laid out on the bar. McNulty, Freeman, Bunk, Holly and Santangelo, some others including Nathan and Ed Norris are in attendance along with many other detectives. They all join in singing Body of an American by the Pogues to mark his passing.
Starts off with some very nice, like, tasteful shots of the presented body of Ray Cole, kind of zooming in on like his badge and the ring on his finger, and you kind of you don't see his face, obviously
partly because it's not him, and partly
I mean it can't be. Yeah. They're not gonna get the real kind of real corpse.
Not gonna go for that continuity error. Yeah,
it's not that realistic.
No.
But yeah, some very nice sort of tasteful shots just to emphasise that, and it's a very, very tender moment for Landsman. And this is kind of the first of quite a few times where it shows that he's just a big softie, really. He's quite a few times he sort of nearly bursts into tears when remembering fellow colleagues, and gives quite a stirring speech about him. He was called.
He served.
And he was counted.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's a fantastic scene for Landsman, particularly as you mentioned. Really, we see that he genuinely does feel a sense of pastoral care towards the office. I guess here, and that he's not just the arsehole that makes all the funny vocab comments with his ridiculously expansive vocabulary. And he's not just the arsehole he makes himself out to be the whole time. He's a great office shepherd, so to speak, and he does one of these eulogies each season from now on. I think season 4 it's for Forster, who again is another actor who died during the filming of the show, and then in the 5th season for McNulty in more of an ironical sense. But it's nice that becomes a mainstay of the show, and they're some of the strongest scenes in the show. Actually, they're really, really good. So it's good to see that from Landsman. And it's just quite crazy that they're so used. I guess they're so used to dead bodies as murder police that it ain't much of a thing for Ray Cole to be spread out on their pool table dead while they go drinking. It's just
the tradition, supposedly.
I'm sure it probably is real if they're depicting it like this, but for me, that's a very kind of a very alien concept.
It's interesting to see the different ways that they deal with grief as well. We see it here where everyone starts to get a bit choked up, and Freeman's response is like, "For God's sake, play the song!"
Yeah.
Before everyone starts tearing up, they're trying to like avoid that, trying to just avoid that brimming over moment, just to lighten it up a bit more and bring it to a conclusion.
Yeah.
But we see, for example, with Omar's crew, after Tasha's death, their way to deal with grief is to really kind of hurt themselves over it. Omar kind of punishes himself, and they seem like they're just going to wallow in it for a while. And these different ways of dealing with the loss.
Yeah, I guess with Omar it's a little bit different because they feel very directly responsible for what happened. So it's a real more cutting grief for them. But it's certainly not to take away from Ray Cole's departure.
I guess that sense of connection and responsibility towards it just has a different representation with the police, because it's more of a sense of brotherhood, or their comrades, brothers in arms, as it were.
There's definitely that feel about it, and particularly when you see Freeman saluting like some of the events that Landsman mentions in the eulogy. Like I think he mentions like the riots of '93, and we see Freeman like raise his glass to the riots, really kind of staking his seniority and experience in the department there. It goes back many, many years.
Doesn't some of the things that Landsman say kind of references several like previous cases that Cole was involved with, and they're meant to be references to films that Colesbury produced, I believe. Oh, right.
That'd be cool.
So there's the Mississippi extradition. And he produced a film called Mississippi Burning. He says the Mississippi extradition, the arson murders. And Colesbury produced a film called Mississippi Burning. And he says a case at the After Hours, and After Hours was also a film that Colesbury
that is cool.
produced.
That is very cool.
And then Dealing with Hot Corners, and of course The Corner, Before the Wire, produced by Colesbury.
Oh, wow, okay.
So yeah, that was... I actually saw that. Actually, I didn't mention this at the start, because I actually read that in Truth Be Told, that book on The Wire. I mentioned that I think it was Dan, mentioned it last week about the books to read. And I said that I put it on my wish list. I actually, as I think I mentioned to you, I WhatsApped you on the day.
Yeah.
I went into town and had to wander around some charity shops just to see if there were any good books about, and I actually spotted The Wire, Truth Be Told, in my nearest Oxfam, and it was only a couple of quid, so I was like, yeah,
brilliant.
Definitely pick that up.
Yeah, the first...
nice little spot.
I guess you read all the early stuff about the HBO pitch and the rest of it. Like, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, it's great. Really good book.
Definitely. And
so many pictures as well.
Just a nice companion for
like
the
a big
series.
Wire picture book, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And for the series in general, I mean, it's a big, nice companion because it does kind of have an overview of all the episodes. Almost like a little mini podcast, but...
and a lot of the photos, although they are photos of scenes, they're like production photos where a lot of characters have been posed for them.
Yeah.
Something about them looks horribly unnatural when they're posing for those characters. Like The Wire, which is a show which is emphasised so much on its voyeurism and kind of this neutral, ambiguous tone and looking on the characters from that kind of perspective. To see photos that are very staged and very kind of...
Yeah.
These are characters in a TV show. Like it just breaks... Oops, just whacked my microphone. It breaks a bit of the immersion of the show a bit. So
yeah, I guess you got to do something to market it, though, haven't you? You got to make them seem like they mean business, even if you do have to kind of bring them out of their natural habitat a little bit. But yeah, great book. Yeah, like you say, perfect companion. I've lost mine. I've been trying to look for mine for the past couple of months, and it's run away somewhere, so I might have to grab another one. But it's a great book.
Check your nearest Oxfam.
Yeah, it's a good catch. That definitely. So where were we with our detectives' wake?
We just kind of we had the bit we kind of have them that he'll start singing that Pogues song, and that kind of closes the scene off.
Following Landsman's overwrought emotion at the end of his eulogy, like really quite moving to see that. And I like seeing McNulty go up to him at the end, give him a pat of approval, and hands him a pint of beer, so he can start the celebrations off. I guess it's not celebrations is the wrong word in this case, but kind of the remembrance drinking, I guess, is a way of putting it.
And we have Ed Norris stumbling outside with 2 shots to give to Bunker McNulty, who are also incredibly drunk.
And
only for Norris to go and be sick on the pavement.
Yeah. And as is
or in the middle of the road.
As is a theme of the show, they always give Ed Norris some of the most offensive lines in the show. He was, of course, the police commissioner during season 1, almost as if to strike some controversy. So I think he says, "So is it like sober up or die, cunts," or something like that? It's something pretty,
yeah,
like pretty ridiculous. And then he just goes and hurls onto the roadside. So it was during this season actually that he did his time in the joint and he went to prison. I think it was a 6-month sentence, and it was actually during filming. So I think for the first few episodes of season 3, it was prior to prison, and then by the time we get to season 4, he's done his time. So there's kind of a period where he's absent from the show quite heavily, I think towards the end of season 3. But we spoke about his prison sentence back in season 1, so we won't rehash it here.
Yeah, we did touch on that a bit, didn't we?
Yeah. And I love how the hearse is kind of waiting in amongst all the madness, ready to grab the Mr. Ray Cole once all the debauchery's finished.
Yeah, they don't look too impressed.
No. And then we have Bunker McNulty lamenting that he still owes him a clearance. And Bunk really having a kind of glass half empty boozing session, kind of lamenting all the aspects of his life that are boring and mundane, and the pension plans, and you wake up every day and it's the same old shit. So it's kind of that horrible depiction of the world that they're painting in these early parts of season 3. And then the futility of the death on the Stairmaster, just pretty painful conversations all around.
Although played off quite nicely, I like the ending shot where there's Norris bending over to be sick and Bunk kind of is handing out that beer to him.
Yeah. Wash it down.
It's kind of
Wash
like,
it down.
this will make you feel better. Like.
Yeah.
And the guys in the hearse looking on, unimpressed. McNulty just an observer.
Yeah, so I guess overall the main value in this scene is it feels like such an authentic experience. Seeing them all really enjoying their drinks and having that boisterous fun, and all the department coming together as well. So the sense of community that goes on within the police department. Eileen Nathan, Santangelo, haven't seen him in a while, just pops up to pay his respects. So all of that makes it a really kind of emotional scene, actually. And I think it's one of the few times where The Wire dwells on an emotional aspect of the show, or allows us to get wrapped up in the emotion of something. It's something that The Wire tends to stay away from. So it's a scene that at least feels sentimental. And this is, we're perhaps by design, we're observing in-show sentimentalism rather than the show itself sentimentalizing something, which it doesn't do at all. It stays away from that. So it was nice to see that. It's certainly a very different sort of curveball. When I first watched this scene, I was like, wow, this is different. This is something quite nice to watch.
It's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
And no doubt a lot of its authenticity comes from the fact that it is, for all intents and purposes, authentic. Like,
yeah, it certainly feels
they're not
like...
just dealing with the death of the character, they're dealing with the death of the real guy.
It would be a pretty bold implementation if it wasn't, a real custom. It would be, considering how authentic the rest of the show is, as far as we're aware.
Yeah.
And there's that great line as well about sharing a dark corner of the American experiment that Landsman brings up, which certainly adds a new perspective on the show for me. It really makes the whole kind of game of power that the people play in the show feel a bit different.
Yeah, it's not the American dream, it's the American experiment.
Yeah. It's more like it, isn't it?
Because it makes it seem a lot darker and foreboding.
Which fits quite nicely with The Wire, really.
Yeah, it certainly does.
Yeah. Okay, so anything else to say about The Wake, or...?
No, I think I'm ready to move on.
All right, let's push on. Okay, so next we have the Western District, and Bunny and Lieutenant Dennis Mello survey territory in their district. Colvin is looking for somewhere away from schools and residences. Mello seems worried about Colvin's plans and asks if it's wise to conceal them from their superiors. Later, as he goes through his felony stats with Mello and his community relations sergeant, he orders them to stop reclassifying things and give the stats straight. Mello worries about the Comstat meeting.
So there's just an opening bit with our opening bit with Colvin and Mello is seeing their relationship, and the fact that Mello is maybe a little bit more realistic about the consequences, but still trusts Colvin enough to go along with it.
Yeah.
As his advisor, and well, he is his subordinate as well. So there's that bit. So they're just looking around all these places that are far away from schools and occupied houses, and Bunny's just plotting his what will ultimately become Amsterdam.
Yep.
He's clearly taking it very seriously.
Well, that's certainly what we can say from a stance of a rewatcher, but on the show is certainly withholding lots of information here for the first timer. He's scoping out a good spot for something. We're not quite sure what. And each district that they go to, I think they go to 3 or 4 districts, and they're kind of splattered throughout the episode, which is quite nice. And each district's quite different from the last, and gives away slightly more of what Bunny is planning. Even Mello's, I think he does like a good shit right when he like pretends to take a toke of a joint. Still keeps things quite cryptic. So it's not until the lift scene later on where we begin to get an inkling of what Bunny's really planning right now.
Yeah. But yeah, good to see, like you say, for a first-time viewer, it's not very clear, but when you watch it again, it's kind of good to see his planning coming in very early on. He's quite pragmatic about it from the start. Doesn't suddenly spring it on us, and he's done all this planning, but we haven't seen any of it. We're actually seeing it taking place.
Yeah.
And just reinforcing that.
Yes, I do quite enjoy those scenes. They're a real whistle-stop tour of all the poverty and desolation over the Western, just to remind us how kind of neglected this part of the city is. I mean, no one is around, every house is abandoned, and there's lots of urban decay going on, and lots of weeds growing everywhere, so it's kind of quite chilling to see all that, really.
And whilst we have someone like Daniels who's tiptoeing along the line for the superiors, in order to follow their keep the stats down thing, Colvin just does not give a single shit, and is like, nope, we give it to him straight, even if it goes up.
Yeah, he's
just going to take it as it comes.
Just tells his men straight away, I can't be doing this anymore. So, should we quickly move on to the next one and discuss that?
Yeah.
Okay, so at Comstat, William Rules predictably singles out Colvin for being the only commander whose felony rate has risen, in this case by 2%. Colvin refuses to make excuses beyond saying that what they are doing is not having an impact. Rules cites Daniels as an example of the kind of commander he wants for solving the shootings in the Eastern. As Rules berates Colvin, Burrell arrives and tells Major Reed about his meeting with the mayor, saying that there is no loyalty. Burrell tells Colvin that he does not care about his veteran status and he will lose his post if the figures do not improve. Burrell closes by telling the district commanders that gods will not save you, as a means of having them meet the necessary reduction figures. Valchek congratulates Daniels on the reputation he's building with Rules. Daniels admits that he is disappointed to have lost the wiretap. Colvin commends Daniels for stopping the drug war. The Northwestern commander remarks that he's pleased to have Daniels building a case against Quintel. The commanders discuss their plans to meet Rules' demands. So Valchek states that he will cheat stats if he needs to in order to improve figures. In the southeast, Colvin says that he's considering legalizing drugs, and the other commanders laugh, not realizing he's truthful in his intent to do so.
So yes, as I say, Colvin doesn't really care. He's not going to offer any excuses. But at the same time, it's still quite a risky move, as we've seen before. Taylor getting replaced, it's clearly just going to be a snap judgment thing. There's not going to be any due process.
Yeah.
And then Burrell gives us our epigraph. And I don't know if we've touched on it before, but I know that David Simon has talked about this idea of Greek tragedy being part of The Wire. And that ultimately, these characters will fall. And as with Greek tragedy, there's a certain mythology to it. And part of that mythology is obviously the gods. And it seems like Baltimore is such a messed up place that even the gods aren't going to get involved. Even they daren't go there. So kind of bringing in that mythology to enhance the Greek tragedy style of the show that I think David Simon said he was somewhat going for.
Yeah, it definitely links in, doesn't it? I think.
And about the gods will not save you. This is not a tale where the gods are going to come to your rescue. Even the gods daren't come here. You can only save yourself.
Yeah, very.
So it's a very, very sort of Very ominous statement from Burrell there.
Yeah, it certainly makes you want to go back to the toilet and hurl up another few dinners if you're in Colvin's position. But yeah, it's good to see the second Comstat scene in the episode, and I like the fact that he demonstrates his 2% bump in the crime quite proudly, and I think he's obviously doing this not out of stupidity, because it is in many ways kind of stupid, but it is there to set a starting point to lead into his 14% decline once the drug zones are up and running, and it will also perhaps potentially prevent people from accusing him of overduking the stats when he brings in the big drops. He was bold enough to let crime rise. Why would he not? Why would he lie about crime later on? So
yeah,
it was good to see that kind of setting a precedent for what he's about to change.
I guess that's followed by the meeting outside, so post Comstat, where we have our meeting, and Valchek is lacking any subtlety whatsoever. It's just like, I'll just cheat on my stats. Like, straight out saying.
Although he did say that he'd try other methods first, although I doubt that somehow.
Yeah, I'm not sure I believe that.
So, yeah, it's pretty ridiculous, and Colvin again just tells it straight. He ain't dealing with the bullshit. All right, so final Western District chapter.
Yeah,
we're now looking at the Herc and Carver stuff. There was a bit less of them this time round. Carver and Herc discuss Burrell's statement in the paper taking responsibility for the delayed academy class. McNulty and Greggs visit them for information, having seen the new developments on the street in the Western, and they have nothing to tell them, as may be expected. Greggs is disappointed that Herc has disregarded her advice about informants. Carver is called away to the roll call briefing and jokes about the downtown detectives being lost and confused. Colvin unveils his plans to move drug trade into 3 specific areas and instructs his men in how to achieve this. Later, McNulty and Greggs track down Bubbles and Johnny to offer them work. Johnny is reluctant, but Bubbles says that he is always willing to work for these 2 detectives. So only a small...
Is this the first time that we hear someone speaking Carver's first name? Because I'm not sure anyone... I can't remember of another time when someone calls him Ellis.
Yeah, that is true. Hey, Ellis.
It seems very kind of out of place, because I can't remember any other time where it's been used.
Maybe he...
It's a small thing.
Yeah,
but,
I thought that as well, actually. Maybe he's doing it to rationalise Rhonda's use of the word Cedric. But, yeah, it's true. I think otherwise we may not know what his name was at all, actually.
But no real change for Herc and Carver, and they're still mostly doing things their way. They're not getting involved in CIs, as we see. They're very much on the outside. They don't have any information to give them. So they don't have a whole lot to do in this episode, really. A
small check-in, definitely, this time round.
Yeah.
We see that they're taking a lot of credit for the piece that Prop Joe and Stringer have created. They're genuinely too naive to not see the bigger picture, that it's not really their, busting heads tactics that's done the job. We also see Carver taking a lot of credit for having the rank of sergeant, as he's called into a meeting, in which he proudly announces his importance. So we still see a bit of immaturity on both sides. And Carver certainly hasn't quite gone through his transition yet, but it will be coming. And then, of course, that leads into Bunny's follow-up speech with his Western men as he actions the Amsterdam zones. He
tries to suggest to them that it is a sting operation and just a very long-term one, but again, with a rewatch, you kind of see that that's not really the case. He's not actually looking to sting them at all. But in a way, this sells it to the men, in a better way. Well, I say men. There are men and women there. But
I mean, Mello has to use violence as a motivator. You still get to kick all the mopes that don't move off our corners. That's the only way he gets them excited about the changes.
Like I said earlier, he's still trying to find a way to work within that particular system. He's not completely daft.
Yeah.
He's willing to take big risks, but he's also, like you say, playing by having those stats go up in the first place, by letting them go up and having no excuses for it. He's just playing the way that the system is perceived by having these ups and downs. And that if he can sell some new part, some new piece of the puzzle that he wants to add, and at the same time reinforce all the old stereotypes that keep people coming back, like being able to kick some heads in if somebody doesn't move along, then that makes it palatable for people.
Yep, definitely. until they get on board with it properly. They're just going to have to use that violent motivator, unfortunately.
Yeah, just introduce it over time.
Yeah. And then that also leads to the bit where, having been failed by Herc and Carver, who don't take notes on who runs the streets, they have to go over to Bubbles, who is more likely to want to know who's, doing what where. And they seem to be at kind of a homeless kitchen where Bubs will potentially end up working in Season 5. I'm not sure if it's the same one.
Well, we've already had a taste of Bubbles' frustration with the way that he's living and just going from, getting high to getting in a lot of trouble to make a little bit of money just to try and get high and kind of going in that cycle.
Yeah.
So I think when he's given the opportunity to make a bit of money from Greggs and McNulty, that is, I don't know, maybe a slightly less dangerous to what he might be used to. He seems to jump at the chance.
Yeah.
I guess the money is still going to be going towards drugs at this stage, but it's certainly much less likely to get him shot or have his trousers stolen.
And Johnny, unfortunately, is becoming increasingly narrow-minded about, I guess, the moral quandary of helping the police.
Growing a serious beard as well.
Yeah, it's real bushy. But he clearly feels like he's on the side of the street and the police should be enemies. I guess that's kind of what's ingrained if you grow up in a neighbourhood like this. And
he's not exactly growing the beard in the TV trope sense, is he? He's not exactly developing as a character here.
The wisdom is not arriving, yeah. True that. So, yeah. So it's good to see that.
That reminds me, actually, I've never looked at the TV tropes page for The Wire.
I briefly have. It goes on forever. Like, you could spend all day there. They've just found the trope for everything.
It's a very dangerous website.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous.
It's unbelievable how many tropes that people have invented on there, and all of them are, very valid. So, yeah,
it's quite difficult to. That's the kind of the joke with TV tropes, isn't it? You have to almost put a warning sign before you put a link to TV tropes to someone, because if you're going to go visit this website, you might not leave for a couple of hours. So.
Because it's not just reading the page, is it? Because some pages are really long, but it's like linking to each trope to see what other shows have used it. It can kind of go on forever, can't it?
And you can discover a lot of new shows through it as well. You're kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool. What show has that, or what show pioneered that, or when's this from? Who was in that? It just kind of leads you on a bit of a merry chase. Anyway, enough about TV tropes.
It's addictive, definitely. TV tropes out, but we do have two final sections. Firstly, we're going to look at the Stanfield crew. So Marlowe calls Fruit to meet with him and asks him why his profits are down. Fruit blames the Barksdale crews encroaching on his turf. Marlowe tells him he wants them moved on and gives him some enforcers to take with him. The following day, Fruit brings his entire team plus some muscle to Pudding and the rest of Bodie's crew and delivers a swift beating. Bodie reports the beating to Stringer at the funeral home, bringing some of his injured crew with him to illustrate the point. So we have
this is like another Comstat in a way, isn't it?
It marries up very nicely. The key quote being, I guess, when I was a young'un, if my count was low, I sure as hell did something about it. And Q bringing in the muscle to duke the way the street is working now. And yeah, as you say, it's kind of a scene that marries up perfectly with the Comstat.
It works nicely. I guess we kind of have a bit of a similar thing with Stringer earlier with his 40-degree day. You need to, even though it doesn't work quite as well, it is kind of based on metrics. You need to be this high and you're this high, and that's not good enough.
Yeah.
Raise your game. Kind of.
And then, of course, they action it, they strike, and it feels like the Barksdales haven't been used to this sort of street turf warfare for a long time now. They're certainly not ready for it.
Certainly not prepared for it.
No, not at all. Even if they are bringing inflatable baseball bats with them. I can never unsee how inflatable those baseball bats are when they use them in the show, because they can contort so much. Like they just look like little pieces of meat.
It's the sound effects that kind of save it a little bit.
Yeah.
But if it weren't for that, yeah, you're right. It looks pretty. It's not all that convincing if you look really, give it a very critical eye.
I'm sure the HD Blu-ray version will really expose it even more.
I can see the seams of the rubber. Yeah. You can see the little bit that you blow into. Yeah. There's the valve on the side of one of them.
The air just pouring out, just the deflation. Oh dear.
You get a director's cut where they've still got the squeaking noise that it makes when it hits them.
Yep. So somehow they drew blood with those baseball bats, and it doesn't make Stringer's problems any less real. he's emerging. I guess he's settling into a business-orientated drug trade, and he's trying to avoid putting much resources into muscle. He's certainly guarding the stash house as well, but he's clearly not thought about providing muscle on the actual trade on the street corners, and he's going to have to now devote more resources to that by the looks of things.
Yep. He's getting kind of stuck in the violence of it all again.
Yeah, almost.
And like we mentioned before, by neglecting to put much effort into that rep and that need to protect yourself and build a bit of a ring of steel, and he's trying. He's doing what we said before, like he's assuming that other people will adopt that business-like approach if he does. But that's just not the case. And as we've seen, Marlowe is a different breed, and he's bringing the violence and the reputation back to the corners in an even greater way than before.
Definitely, yeah. And it was arrogant of
Makes
Stringer to
Avon look
assume
pretty
that,
tame.
Yeah, definitely. So, with that in mind, we'll quickly go on to our final strand. That's Cutty. He's got a bit more to do this episode. So, Cutty meets with the sister of an old flame of his named Grace, to try and find out where she's living now. He eventually gets the information he's looking for. Cutty tracks Grace down to the school where she is now working and watches her leave. He dresses in a suit and tie and says goodbye to his mother before going to meet Grace. Grace is not pleased to see Cutty, but seems impressed that he's out of the game, offering him potential work in the Parks and Rec department. So we see Cutty connecting with an old-time friend who's a bit down at heel, the sister of Grace Sampson, who ends up being a fairly important Season 4 character. And we learn that she's currently at Ida B. Wells School, which isn't quite Edward... Is it Edward Tillman, I think, the Season 4 school?
Yeah, she ends up at Tillman Middle.
That's it.
with Prez in Season 4.
That's right, yeah. So,
although there's a sense that she's been there a little while, or at the very least she's been a teacher for quite a while.
yeah.
So this is obviously an established career path for at least a little while, as her sister laments that she's now gone there to look down on the people who live on the streets, and even makes a reference to Condoleezza Rice, which I don't know if that's meant to be a continuation of the 9/11 Iraq War on Terror kind of thing, of which Condoleezza Rice was a major figure.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's part of that, but...
May well be. A lot of people being referenced this time, various organisations. So, yeah, so it's good to see the mixture between those two, and I guess we're left to fill in the blanks that before Cutty went to jail, those two sisters may well have been in the same situation. They'd have been kind of both living the ghetto lifestyle, and since then, Grace has climbed out and has made a real, great career for herself by the looks of things, much to the jealousy of others around her. So it's good to see how much that's kind of changed, and Cutty's clearly taken aback by seeing her in this light.
Obviously, a little bit of history between them.
Yeah.
That is not going to be rekindled which much to the sadness of Cutty.
Yeah. So overwhelmed by how much has changed, and we don't know if she's got a husband or a boyfriend, but I guess we can assume that she's settled down somewhere, and she's certainly not interested in going back to Cutty. I guess the memories might be too painful, but yeah, it's nice to see Cutty. I assume Cutty wanted to meet her the first time, but he decided that perhaps seeing her in this light, he needed to make more of an effort to make it seem like he was on the straight and narrow as well. So he goes back and does a bit of punch bagging and grabs a suit, and then goes back and tries it on, and it comes across as very forced, actually, I think, when he actually turns up in his suit. But I guess he's trying anything he can to clutch onto the life he had before prison.
Yeah, I think he realises that he might have to do it for real rather than trying to blag his way in. He can't just put a nice suit on and then expect to walk himself into that position. He needs to work on it a bit more. But of course, he does end up going back into the game, end up doing a little bit more work before he comes to that full realisation that he's going to have to go completely straight. Yeah.
I think that's when he gets bored with his gardening job very quickly and decides that perhaps the excitement of the game is worth the risks. But clearly...
Well, it's after that guy that he's working with in the landscape and gives him a bit of a talk, and he's like, yep, it's crap, that's the way it is. You're going to come here every day and it's going to be crap.
And there's that beautiful scene.
You just got to do it.
Yeah, yeah, it's very true. And we're jumping ahead a little bit again, but there's that beautiful scene where it's the gardening truck with all the workers alongside like one of the I think it's one of Marlowe's drug trucks, and they're kind of waiting for the green light, and it's
music pounding.
Yeah, it's a real kind of luring him back into the game, and the two lifestyles laid down side by side for comparison. I think that might be next episode actually, so we'll look forward to that. But yeah, so it's good. So Grace says that she can set up Cutty with a minister that she knows might be able to get him a job, and of course there's more linkages between groups here, as the minister turns out to be the deacon that we met last time round. Is it Melvin Williams? So good to see that, as we'll get to later on. And speaking of beards, I mean, we haven't mentioned it yet, but Cutty's beard is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
He's got some of the best facial hair I've ever seen, I think. Just so bushy and full and just, it's fantastic.
It's pretty incredible.
Incredible guy. And we also see, of course, that all the schools in Baltimore seem to be named after famous, influential people. A bit of Ida B, a bit of Edward Tillman.
Yeah.
But that's more of a side comment, to be honest. Yeah, I guess anything else?
Are there any other sections?
That's all for the recap. Sorry, it only took 2 hours and 15 minutes, but that's the way things go these days. Have you got anything else to mention, or should we go into our 4 final sections to close off?
Don't think there's anything else. No, that's about it for me, yeah.
Okay.
Ready to move on to the final bits.
I don't care how many years you have on this job. If the felony rate doesn't fall, you most certainly will. The gods are fucking you. You find a way to fuck them back. It's Baltimore, gentlemen. The gods will not save you.
All right, so this episode was called Dead Soldiers. And if we remember back to early season 1, Bub schooled us on the meaning of dead soldiers as far as the street understands it. And it's the idea of the dead vials, or the used heroin vials that sit on the street and crack underneath your feet as you walk in kind of drug-ravished areas of the city. So there's kind of the more literal meaning, I guess. And then we also have...
Is that the bit where it's with Sydney and he talks about how needing to have all busted up shoes because they'd normally have all the glass bits underneath?
Exactly, yeah. That's where he says...
Well, I don't know if they're glass or plastic or whatever, but he says you got to have stuff stuck into your shoes because you're always treading all on the discarded vials.
That's right, on the dead soldiers, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool to see that, but I guess it has more of a metaphorical meaning, as always. We do see a couple of fairly important characters die here, namely Ray Cole and Tosha. But you made a lovely reference earlier that I hadn't considered about Omar kind of recruiting soldiers to carry out his own vengeance that should be his to carry. And then
he draws in a bit of a personal army for his vendetta.
Yeah, that's a fantastic reading of it, which I hadn't considered.
Other than that, it doesn't extend too much past that, I don't think. It's a fairly on-the-nose title.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, perhaps D'Angelo's kind of in there, and maybe the Barksdale's inability to effectively defend their drug trade. The soldiers, or the muscle has kind of gone, is dead. Bit of a tenuous link, but if we're kind of trying to find all the possible iterations, it's no time after time reading, but it's good.
There's a slightly martial element to Landsman's speech about Cole, where he talks about him being called and having served and having been counted. There's a slightly military tradition, martial side to that, I think. It's kind of hitting that dead soldier's line home.
Definitely, yeah.
But that's all I have for the title.
Yeah, sure. What did you make of the epigraph, "The gods will not save you," as spoken by Burrell in Comstat?
I think I pretty much already covered what I was going to say about this, and just regarding that Greek tragedy side of the show, and that it's trying to bring a bit of mythology about it, and that Baltimore is so dysfunctional and so messed up that even the gods don't want to get involved. Although Burrell is kind of making a god out of himself to presume that he knows that.
Yeah,
but that's a different argument altogether.
Yeah. For me, I think it was more, regardless of what's possible within the bounds of the rules of the department, you're going to need to bring in the results that we want. And it's perhaps the most innocent way of telling someone that they're going to have to duke the stats, they're going to have to do the impossible, they're going to have to benefit from divine intervention if they're going to actually, meet these targets.
Yeah, if the gods are fucking you, you find a way to fuck them back.
Exactly, yeah.
You don't play fair, you don't go by the rules, you just break it in any way you can in order for you to obtain some kind of victory. Except in this case, the victory is defined by those making these statements, so it makes it seem like a very cruel and very complete injustice within the system.
Yeah. So I think he's just finding an innocent way of conveying that. Not that it's particularly innocent to tell someone that the gods are trying to fuck you, but in that context, it's probably the most kind of covert way of putting it across.
But pretty good epigraph, I think.
Yeah.
Pretty memorable.
Not bad at all. I like the way it feeds into the Greek tragedy theme of the show, as you mentioned, yeah. It kind of has more meaning than some of the epigraphs we've dealt with before. And in light of that, who was your favourite character or characters? I mean, for me, Burrell stood out a lot this episode.
Burrell was very good.
Yeah. We
has to deal with a lot here.
Shades of sympathy for the guy when he's normally pretty dislikable as a character.
He's very hard to sympathise with.
Yeah.
But yeah, a rare moment here, especially when he has to deal with Carcetti's rubbish. And I think, as you said before, he's a bit squeezed between the two of them here. And Carcetti has this power play, and then he's just got to deal with the fallout from that, or the rubbish that comes from it about having to take the fall from the media.
Definitely,
kind of feel for him having been parked into this space, and although he's getting what he wants in the long run, he's getting his academy and all that stuff. Especially as a man who values values loyalty, and he values the way that he's perceived and his PR and politics and everything. Maybe it may seem like too big a price for him, but I guess if he wants to keep it close with the mayor, that's the way he's got to do it. As he said to Carcetti, he values loyalty, he values his mayor, values chain of command. So he's clearly, he's a soldier in that regard. He is kind of like that institution's version of the soldier.
Yeah, definitely, he takes the fall. Yeah, so I think Burrell at the top already alongside Cutty. I think we saw more of him this week, and more allusions to his past and the pain and trying to piece things back together. Really good to see that, and the dynamics he has with Grace was quite a painful scene to watch.
I think it's nice with Omar being a bit more vulnerable as well.
Yeah, very true.
More good performances from Michael K. Williams. He does really well here and really portrays the anguish of Omar and his weakness here in this episode, which we've seen so little of. So he kind of brings the character into that air of vulnerability very nicely, I think. So mainly Burrell and Omar for me in this episode. Not as hard to choose from, I think, just because there is so many characters making lots of little bits here and there.
Yeah,
that it's less defined as being a one character episode or two character episode.
Definitely, I think I might throw Kima in there as well. We see a bit more of her than we have done in recent times with her struggles and them drawing the connections between her and McNulty. I was quite pleased to see what was going on there. So yeah, I guess that's the characters that stood out for us. And finally, the scenes that were most memorable.
Scenes.
I think
you've got to throw the action fix shit scene in there, haven't you?
Absolutely. We don't
just
really
because
need
it's
to
a rare
explain
treat.
That. Yeah, it is the rarest treat. I don't think we ever get action more high octane than that in the whole show. So it certainly sticks out. And
very intense scene, very cleverly worked. Again, not needing to use much dialogue, especially out the back where we see them figuring out what's happening on inside, and then the way that they move to protect it. It's all very, very nicely shot. So yeah, just a real treat of a scene to get a bit of build up and action, and like I said, quite possibly the longest part of unbroken, violence, as it were, in the whole show. I think.
Yep. A
real shootout.
Definitely. And then I think in terms of the other scenes, the more conventional scenes, the ones that struck best with me were the ones where Burrell is getting bashed around between the two, the rock and the hard place. Carcetti and Royce. Particularly enjoyed Carcetti's expert orchestration of it. He seems to understand politics like the back of his hand, and he's playing him into his hand completely here. So as painful as it is to watch, it's quite nice to see these just the power struggles between all of them really. And Burrell, who's always been this kind of figure of power at the top of the police chain, now all of a sudden we see what happens on the other side of that. You know, the responsibilities that he has from the other side of the perspective, or the other perspective at least.
I was also going to say that Cole's Wake is another obvious choice just because of its emotional impact. So that's kind of that's another fairly obvious choice, I think.
Absolutely. Otherwise, there's nothing too much that stands out really in this episode. Very strong, of course, but very consistent.
By the way, going back to something we said earlier, the reporter from the city desk at Baltimore Sun that goes to see Carcetti, his name is Jeff Price. That's the character's name.
A character name, okay, sure. I don't think he's a particularly major reporter, as he doesn't have a particularly big role from
he
what I
just
remember.
Pops up here
5.
and there.
But he is there to remind us that he's there for the continuity at least.
Yeah, well, it's nice. Got to have that kind of continuity going through it.
Yeah, brilliant, as we always say.
The realism.
Okay, all right. So I think again we break another record for time. Hopefully these podcasts aren't too long for you guys. Even by my standards, I enjoy podcasts. This is 2.5 hours is long. So hopefully we're still awake at the moment.
Yeah. So that kind of that brings it to a close, I guess. Our next episode 4. You're better at remembering the titles of the next one than me. I haven't looked it up yet.
Amsterdam.
Oh, it is Hamsterdam next, is it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's called Amsterdam. It's a bit ambiguous. It might be with an H, it might be without. We'll have to decide next week.
All right. Well, so either way, it's continuing to steam through season 3 and longer podcasts, so we've got a lot to say, but I think it is getting more complex. I don't think it's just got longer arbitrarily. I mean, yeah, we've had that earlier section, but there's definitely more to say about the show just as even more strands come in.
Oh, definitely. I dread to think how long it will take in season 4.
And we can look at them in greater detail as we go through, because in season 1 we want to talk a little bit more about introduction of the show and how things stand at the very beginning, and then as the show moves forward we can talk about things in context a little bit more, just because it makes sense to us as we go through it.
Yeah.
I think we can talk a bit more freely about it, so that's what's opened it up in a certain sense. I mean, to think that the very first episode, or one of the very first episodes we did, was only just an hour.
It was like under an hour almost, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. So.
And we said all we could say. It speaks to that complexity, that snowball effect.
That, and we've got a lot more comfortable with podcasting over time.
I think so, yeah. That may well be true.
When you first start doing it, you're very aware that you're podcasting, and then once you get used to it, you just do it. It just becomes like a habitual thing. When you're doing it every week. You know?
Yeah.
But it's nice. That's the way it should be. That's the way podcasts tend to come across best, and we're learning that as we go. I mean, it's the first thing that we've ever attempted. Before we came into this, we'd never done anything like this before. Having sort of an unbroken conversation about one particular TV show for hours at a time every week. It's quite a daunting prospect, but I know we keep bringing it up as we go along. But I think personally, I'm quite proud of what we've done. Really, I think we're.
Yeah, it's really good. We've almost been going for a year now. I think 9 months or so. We've been going for, and we're. Give it another couple of weeks, we'll be halfway through the show.
Yeah, amazing.
Made some progress, definitely.
Well, thanks very much for joining us once again. We'll see you next week. The next episode will be out on the 22nd of May, where we'll have Season 3, Episode 4. Keep the emails and messages coming. You can contact us on the site at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com, or you can send an email to us directly at caughtonthewire.gmail.com. Thanks very much for joining us. Take care. Enjoy your week.